Michael Shellenberger.
John Popola, good to be with you.
Welcome back once again, our biggest guest. Our biggest.
Oh, stop it.
There is so much for us to talk about. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So the question is, in what order? And we do have some props here, which I think speak to it. Namely, radicalism. A radicalism that you have been a part of in your past. We have a radical new mayor in New York City. And you wrote a whole book about this, San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. So I know you've got a lot of experience with that.
Yes.
We have everything happening with Maduro and the Trump administration, which you've had a lot to say about. But I want to start with this latest wave of civil disobedience around ICE. We've had this shooting, this kind of horrible, tragic exchange with this woman that's become this kind of political Rorschach test about who's at fault. But the street protests were ready to go, were already happening, and now, of course, they're happening more.
Right.
I guess, how have you digested this thing, having been sort of in this sort of radical left in the past and sort of understanding the mindset?
I mean, the first thing is I think that it's just way premature to judge the particular killing of that woman in her car and whether it was justified or not. I don't trust people on X as the sleuths in this. We saw with the George Floyd killing that a lot of information comes out. They may seem like simple situations, and then you learn more. It's just a classic, Hollywood detective story. You learn, there's all this other evidence that needs to be considered. So we just don't know. I mean, the George Floyd killing, for example, there was supposed to have been sort of a hobble inserted to protect his airway. That wasn't there. But then the actual manual for the police said you didn't have to use it. But then they had updated the manual. But then there was sort of some it went like that,
Yeah.
And so my kind of read it. I was like, I don't think Derek Chauvin should go to prison for all that time. Was there some violation? Maybe you kind of come to it. But so, I mean, that a jury will, I'm assuming, look at this or I would expect there to be some sort of, there should be a proper investigation. I won't say that there will be. The broader issue is just, a radicalization of the left. And I think that you mentioned before, I personally come from the radical left. So I know the radical left extremely well. I definitely moderated, for a period of years. But what I think is so striking from my point of view is that the Democratic Party is a radical party. It's a radical left party. And what I mean by that is that the I don't know if it's the majority of people, but the most influential part of the party is radicalized. And so you start to, and I think it got radicalized really after Trump. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but I think you can see the evidence for it in terms of the behaviors. And it's part of a broader radicalization in the society. The statistic that terrifies me is that the share of college students that say that violence may be justified to stop a campus speaker rose from under 20% in the year 2020 to 33% last year, 2025.
A third.
That's a third of all college students that think that violence may be necessary to stop a speaker. I mean, that is a wake-up call. That is an existential problem for the country if you've got that share of your future college-educated leaders who think that violence may be necessary.
All right, real quick. If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It lets YouTube know that you want to see more Dad Saves America, and it helps spread the word. So it's one of the best things you can do to support what we're doing. And now, back to the show.
So as I was saying, Nolan, our producer, brought his, having grown up in your fellow Berkeley area, collects these things.
Yeah.
There was a couple of these in this one. Do It. That stuck out. And let me find the first here because it sort of speaks to this quite well. Revolution is theater in the streets, and it shows from a 1960s sort of put that up there for the just people taking to the streets, throwing stones at the cops walking down the street. There's this era, the late 60s, sort of almost enshrined as a kind of, it's almost like a rite of passage or something for some people, or a sense of like connecting to something bigger to participate in this.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? Because, the most recent body cam footage from this thing, which came out just a couple days ago, shows one more angle on it, which is the woman who was shot's wife is out of the car, filming ICE, cursing at them. It is not it's conscious what they're doing. They were there on purpose, even if they didn't mean to try to run. We don't know what's in people's minds, but we do know that like they were activists. That was an activist act.
Right.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
What's going on in their head? Like from your perspective and your own experience, like what is going on in your head that you say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put myself in that much peril.
Right. ICE are, for those people, their thinking is that these ICE officers are Nazis, like literal Nazis. They're fascists, that Trump is a fascist, that the country's being, run by fascists, that Stephen Miller's a fascist, that it's an existential crisis. And we all know that if your country's being taken over by fascists, that, not just nonviolent, but even violent opposition is necessary. Hollywood has glamorized that. The classic moral case is the time machine going back and killing baby Hitler. Everybody, when they think about Hitler, everyone, one of the first things, understandably, that is relatable is how would you kill Hitler? And the heroism for 80 years, this picture of heroism was of fighting fascism and defeating fascism. So you on one hand we go, it's radical, but the mythology and what is structuring their own thinking, the major narrative is the most mainstream narrative. I mean, it's the narrative, of Hollywood films for 80 years, of the imaginary, as people say. So that's what's going through their heads. They're heroes. They're resisting. They're fighting back. Everybody's implicated. Those ICE officers are as implicated as President Trump. That's the thinking.
I can empathize with it up to a certain point, right? In that it's not hard to find horrible things going on, right? Horrible things going on with the police. The immigration enforcement in particular has this problem of a pretty physically extreme process going on being applied at least sometimes to people who are actually like here peacefully. Yes, they broke the law, but they are here. They aren't like total degenerates. They're here like trying to live their life. They came here like our great-grandparents did when it was much easier for our great-grandparents and not easy now. So
and probably a lot of our great-grandparents came in legally. If we're being honest, I don't think. I know mine came legally. I suspect yours did too.
Yeah, well, I think I'm a right of center guy. I'm more moderate on immigration, legal in general, I think, than my peers. And when I look at the history, so my great grandparents all came in like the early 1920s. As I understand the history, in 1924. The Immigration Restriction Act was passed, and then the Depression, and basically in the period between 1924 and 1965, it went from being like you just show up at Ellis Island with a face and you don't have tuberculosis and you basically get brought in and maybe they knock a vowel off your name, to being very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And even those 65 open things up, as I understand it, there's like 10-year waiting lists to come in through the legal door. Have you, especially with your work around homelessness, which has a lot of people that are at the margins, like how do you think about where immigration is today for America? Because Europe's got very different problems.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much in there to unpack. So, I mean, I think on the issue, first of all, we know the public is like 80% support in favor of closing the border. And then when you get to, are you in favor of ICE raids at Home Depots? I think the number goes down to something like 30 or 40%. So I think the Trump administration knows that they're spending their political capital to do those kinds of ICE enforcements. So they're making a so I think just to consider it, first, at the political level, Trump administration is making a calculation that it's worth it. And their thinking is that it is scaring immigrants back to their home countries. Mm-hmm. We have a chapter in our book about this, but something like 600,000 migrants have formally left the country since Trump took office self-deported. And then the administration estimates through the Census Bureau's ongoing survey of thousands of people that an additional 1.5 million or so self-deported in addition to those 600,000 that they can prove. I interviewed a liberal immigration person who said that they don't know if there's been any additional people leaving. I spoke to an anti-immigrant expert who said those numbers are 100% correct. they're based on telephone surveys. The challenge is that the number of people responding to those surveys has been going down year after year after year, so it's hard to tell what's in that. But I think it's fair to say that at least some amount of people are being scared away, and that's why they're doing those raids. It's to basically scare people off. It's in their reasoning. I think these very aggressive, and I'm not defending it, and I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying in the White House is thinking, and Stephen Miller famously, you do these really aggressive actions, and it's going to require actually less force later. I will say there is pretty good support for this on things like riots, where we saw actually in the 60s, the riots that were, this is very politically incorrect, of the many politically incorrect things we'll say, but the fact of the matter is that the southern states that were used to cracking down on riots and being tougher, particularly on African Americans, that cracking down earlier in riots makes the riots much less bad. And so I think there's a sort of liberal thing, which is why do they have to be so mean and whatever? And it's like, well, because actually there is a calculation that if you do that, then you would actually use less force later. And I think that similar thinking pervades a lot of what the Trump administration is doing, including on foreign policy, but certainly on ICE raids.
It's, when you get beyond sort of street antics as theater, all of these issues quickly get so complicated if you're trying to be honest and not just sort of snap into like a partisan position, because the immigration one is, well, let me get this straight. So you don't like this enforcement, but then it's only gotten to this point politically because for the past 5 years, there was an absolute provable open invitation with special apps created to facilitate mass illegal immigration. So that's how is that not flagrant lawlessness? It's like this horrendous ratchet effect. It's like, so what's going on?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you just said it. I mean, I just think that you just nailed it there. I mean, the polarization, the political polarization manifests as these extremely wild swings between extremes. So I mean, Biden's open borders were insane. I mean, it's just to the point where the people that were around him now kind of can't even tell a coherent story about what was going on, which, sidebar is, a massive undermining of liberal credibility, because the liberal argument, left of center argument for forever has been that, hey, we have experts who are smarter than you, more equipped than you, better prepared than you to manage these policies. Conservatives tended to be more like, we need to go with tradition and more like intuition and kind of go with things that have worked in the past. And that was the kind of two contested arguments. And then when the Democrats opened the border and claimed that it was being driven by experts, I think it really undermined their credibility. So that's a huge part of it. But yeah, I mean, it's these are very interesting times. There's never going to be. I mean, I tell my kids and my students, this is an amazing time to be alive, because I think you're living through clearly a transitionary period still that could see much more significant changes, but definitely playing out on the immigration front, as far as I can tell.
It seems like, and I have so many props. I have so many props. Well, so one of them is this book, Radical Son.
Yeah.
And there's a phrase that I think this book popularized because David Horowitz is sort of like you. He came up through the radical left and then sort of left the left.
Right.
And it is that the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? Because right now, if the issue is immigration, I mean, the issue keeps shifting, right? And we're going to shift through this conversation towards a bunch of them. But staying on immigration and ICE, and now this is the new George Floyd moment. Let's take to the streets and millions of people about this issue. What is the revolution if the issue is never the issue?
Right. Or if it's always an omnicause, that's like a new online term that people use, or the latest cause. Yeah. I think that's absolutely the right framing of it. I think when I think back to myself being on the radical left, and even the photos, you're like, oh, wow, that looks exciting. You're like, it's exciting. You're part of something important. There's a narcissism in it, which is like, I am creating this future. I'm changing the world. I mean, look at how exaggerated it is. The grandiosity, which is one of the main characteristics of narcissism, is part of that radicalism. And yeah, the revolution is the point. I mean, that's the goal. I mean, that's the excitement of it. And it doesn't matter what the cause is, because it's all pushing towards the same revolution and the same completely radical change in society. So your point is right, whether it's trans or migration or whatever it is, that's the ultimate driver for it. I think it's ultimately spiritual. I think it's a disordered response to dealing with secularization, modernity, the human condition. It's people are not getting their spiritual needs met. They don't even recognize that they have spiritual needs being met. They just are fully of the belief that that they're not even like really interpreting anything. They're just absolutely playing this heroic, role in a Manichean black versus white, or black and white, I should say, not black versus white, but black and white, no grays kind of struggle against evil.
You can feel it in that material, in that footage. The like, so, to linger on this couple and this woman who was shot, they have kids. And usually when you look at these things, Abby Hoffman types, they're not people with kids. So there's been something that's happened where the radicalization has expanded beyond sort of like unattached, like young people. Like these are middle-aged white women.
Right.
Which seems to also be a pattern. It's like a meme, like the affluent white, what is it? Affluent white female liberal, awful.
Wow, I haven't heard that. Wow, that's brutal.
Yeah, AWFL, affluent white female liberal.
Wow. Right. Yeah.
You haven't heard this one with how much you're on Twitter or X?
Yeah.
It's not very nice.
Right.
It's certainly a generalization.
But everybody knows what you're talking about.
But everybody, I've said this to a couple people recently who had your reaction, like, oh my God. They were like, oh my God, I've never heard that. You're brilliant. We should make T-shirts. I'm like, I'm not brilliant. I don't know if Michael Malice came up with this. Somebody did this, not me. That's smarter than me.
Yeah.
What's driving the awfuls in your view? Because you've spent a lot of time in Berkeley, California. This is like practically a factory for this type of mindset. Like,
yeah.
Do you have a sense of why it's shifted to this sort of cohort of people, not just like college students who don't have kids? It's like now it's like middle-aged lesbians with kids. Like what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. This is if you kind of think back to what was the role of, assertive, strong, powerful, probably above average intelligence. People watching this are going to be like, they're going to hate that, but probably like educated, involved,
schooled at least, educated up for debate.
Moralizers, opinionated. Those women played essential roles in the village when we had villages and we were organized in that way. They were, they disciplined, they kept kids in line, they kept their husbands in line. They played a really like almost an invisible role. If you just think back, whatever it was, the village, the shtetl, the pueblo, wherever these women are from, they're busybodies. The kind of language we use to describe them, busybodies, old crones, like this picture of these women sort of nagging. Well, that's an important social function. Like you don't have to be a sociologist. I don't have to go to Weber or Durkheim for you to understand how those women in the past played an important role. Well, now we're in a completely different society. What is the role of women like that? We're sort of reduced on the one hand to, being the mothers of the family, but these women have a, I think in some ways, a very healthy calling to be of larger service to the community. They just get swept up in a particular, ideology, a radical ideology that kind of positions them as these heroic figures. And they become kind of, unchained or unconstrained by a whole set of other values that the village has had in the past to prevent women from going crazy, which, by the way, didn't always work because you had witches being burned and you had young women, behaving in ways. So certainly things can fly off the handle. I'm not trying to romanticize traditional life, but it's to sort of say, some of these impulses are really necessary and wonderful, and they're just in a modern world where they're just completely inappropriate, and there's no counterweight to check them. It's all happening at a time when there has been a big debate about what's happened with the increasing role of women and how that may have contributed to woke cancel culture. Mm-hmm. This is Helen Andrews is someone that's been out there on this. There's a woman at Harvard named Joyce Benenson who's looked at both primates and humans and kids all around the world. And she finds that, boys play war. They form these really strict hierarchies. All the boys are included, but they're in the hierarchy. They know where they sit in the hierarchy. You know, the less competent, dumber ones, they're at the bottom of the hierarchy, but they're still in it. Whereas the women are tending to level, bring the low status women up and the high status women down, and then ostracize and exclude women who do not participate in that particular form of leveling. Girls who think they're too important, you know, women who think they're too high status. So the cancellation, shunning, these things are traditionally more feminine attributes. In this world where if that's the culture that's getting set in universities, media, you know, HR departments of corporations, it could be men as well engaging in those behaviors, but that's sort of been the argument. It's also Corey Clark is another one of the important psychologists who've been doing this work, arguing. And it's, you know, it's not like you can exactly prove it, but it offers a lot of explanatory power, you know, when you consider it. So I do think, yeah, you're right to detect there's some kind of disordered feminine energy that in some other context with some like kind of countervailing forces could be quite good for communities.
Yeah, this has been a theme that I've spent more and more time with on the show and just in my own thinking, because we went through this protracted period of just being browbeaten that there's no such thing as differences between men and women at all.
Right.
And then as part of the sort of radical feedback loops, now we do have the other extreme. We have the sort of like women are evil and repeal women's right to vote. That's one reaction. But we do have to, it is a weird thing to contend with this. Like, I'm not sure it's, I think Helen Andrews?
I think so, yeah.
I think her argument is basically, and I definitely want to have her on to talk about it directly, but I think her argument is at least, it's time for us to not have laws that explicitly favor women. Like, we are now at the point where we should have a level playing field, and that this like continued treatment of the society like it's a monstrous patriarchy in need of like countervalence or the revolution that we're talking about. Like, so much of this is like that same revolutionary zeal.
That's part of it. There's another part of it too. And I think the awareness of these gender differences, which is incredibly well, I mean, the gender differences is very well supported. The question is whether how much of wokeism that can explain in cancel culture.
Sure.
But the gender differences that stuff is very well supported. It's a big part of evolutionary psychology and has been for a really long time. I think the public being aware of it and understanding that the whole blank slate idea, or the idea there's not important psychological sex differences, that's ridiculous. Like, that's pseudo. That's pseudoscience. Like, it is mainstream psychological research that there are very big differences between men and women psychologically and socially. And then I think part of that is that, look, you know, men in that hierarchical way, they have been the ones. I mean, it has been men that built civilization. They built these, you know, meritocratic institutions. I don't just mean they were out there shoveling things in the physical labor, but they built, you know, a system of law and liberal democracy. And I mean, all of our founding fathers and Locke and I mean, these were all men, and they were thinking about meritocracy. They were thinking about justice. Women are perfectly capable of doing that. I think the argument has been that there are more womanly ways of nurturing, of showing immediate care for somebody. I disagree with the idea that empathy describes the main problem for the left, but nonetheless, there's sort of an immediate like concern. I'm going to be concerned for this person right in front of me, as opposed to thinking about, well, but if we, you know, show all this concern to all the people, then we're going to have 1 billion Americans like overnight. If you just are basing this on immediate empathy, so I think she's saying we should be aware that these gender differences exist, and there's nothing wrong with women. There's nothing right about men in the sense, but if you're running an organization that's supposed to be meritocratic, that is supposed to be focused on excellence, it can't just be, you know, focused on people's feelings. And so the women that need to run those organizations also need to have that meritocratic, you know, attitude. So do the men. The men can adopt these feminine characteristics. But I think that is important for people to know, is that a lot of the problems that we've seen in institutions. And over the Christmas break, there was like a monster viral essay by a guy named Jacob Savage in Compact, where he describes how Hollywood and the news media basically refused to hire white men for a period of like 10 years. And he argues that we can see the consequences in terms of quality.
I can't remember who the research, there was, Quillette had done sort of a summary of, it's probably some of the folks you mentioned, that even in terms of recent polling of sorts, like you're talking about the college students' shifts, there's stuff that is hard to look in the face. Like, women value the pursuit of truth fundamentally a lot less than men, especially if it's balanced against something like care or harm.
Yes.
Which this is before the Helen Joyce stuff or Helen Andrews writing. Although, I mean, how do you have universities that don't pursue? I mean, we know what it looks like.
Yeah,
it's what we have now.
Yeah, we're dealing with the consequence of it. I will say, Joyce Benenson, this Harvard researcher, one of her favorite experiments, and she's done it all over the world. Okay, so it's not cultural. Is that she'll have children, and it's also very young children, draw a picture, and then she'll have the children rate all the other kids' papers. I think she does it like publicly, like it's not secret, like the kids rank them. The girls are very reluctant to, have big differences in terms of ranking between people for fear of hurting their feelings. The boys are very comfortable, ranking those pictures. So this is very deep in us, this organization. And she has very good explanations, I think, for why that would be in terms of men needing to, do a certain kind of labor and participate in sort of hunting bands that are hierarchical and have different roles, and women needing to stay there and take care of the kids and get along and kind of maintain community back in the village. I think having some of that awareness is as important as any kind of structural change. It's not even clear what kind of, like you're saying, I don't even know what kind of a structural change it would be. At this point, I don't even know that. I guess there is some cases of still having gender preferences, but when women are over 50% of all managers and administrators in organizations, like, what else are you going to do?
That needs to be 100. Yeah, I don't know.
It needs to be 100. Yeah, exactly.
60-40, not good enough. It's still a patriarchy. So you have this general out in front of female activism in particular, and activism more broadly, but like staying on the gender issue for a second. This particular moment with these two women who have children, leave the gay issues out of it. Just they have children. There's really like a weird conflict there. So, being motherly means I'm not going to put myself in harm's way to potentially die when I have kids, because who's going to take care of my kids? And on top of that exclusionary thing you're talking about, which I was just talking to my sister. I have a niece who's below 10, and she was just talking to me about how she was going over to a friend's house, and this girl who's really friendly to her when they're just one-on-one, but there was like another girl there, and so they were both ganging up on her, and she didn't understand why. And I said, well, Steph, like, that's like in the literature. Like, the boys will just say, punch you in the gut, and then you start to play. That exclusion from the group thing is there. But like, open borders is not excluding from the group. So there's all these weird cross currents that take place in that moment. Is it just that they're not thinking about the system thing? It's just like, no, this is like, how do you rank the thing that you're angry about as a radical?
First, I would say that I would also just bet that those two women had no idea the danger they were in, that they were not deliberately seeking out risk. I mean, they may be they probably are more risk-taking than your average, woman would be. But I very much suspect that they really thought they were pretty invulnerable. And I think there's entitlement in that. Like, of course, I should be able to do whatever I want to a cop and not suffer any consequences. And that's obviously incorrect, as we've seen. I think that, and then the ideology plays a role. There's this very famous study, and people will probably make too much of it because it's a single study, but and now it's become like a meme on X, which measures your empathy towards your own group and empathy towards external groups, and they show it like a little like, part of me thinks it's probably neurobabble in some sense, that somebody's going to disprove that study. But the fact that it's so, the fact that, like, particularly the online right, cites it so often, I think, shows that there's something to it, which is you have you're more sympathetic to these people you've never met, these that are from foreign countries that are like literally you have no, fundamental ethical or legal obligation to, in contrast to like a police officer, or in this case, an ICE officer, who is like clearly vulnerable. He's like in front of your car and, whatever. So, why is it you have, and we see that a lot, I mean, the progressives that on the one hand would be like, telling me that I'm not compassionate towards a homeless person because I think that they should be required to get rehab, will, on the other hand, go and celebrate the murder of a 31-year-old father, Charlie Kirk, publicly celebrate that. That extreme. That's why I don't love the empathy, because I don't think there was empathy being shown towards Charlie Kirk or his family after his murder by all these progressives who went online to celebrate his murder. But you also do see it's selective empathy, very intensive. Well, at least it's supposed empathy towards some group of people. The other thing I will say is I don't even think that it's real empathy, in the sense that I think that real empathy actually requires understanding a person's situation. Real empathy is deep and profound. I don't think that's what's going on. I think that it's the women are feeling powerful and proud of themselves, and they're moralizers, and they want to get recognition from their friends and from social media for their heroism, and that overrode all sensible thinking, including the potential vulnerability of a police officer.
When you first got into this world of radical politics, put yourself back into that your younger self. What was the draw? What was the internal engine that had you put yourself in harm's way, take risks? What was stay motivated to do things? I know and we're going to get to talking about South America, because you've been engaged in South America in a lot of ways for a really long time.
Oh yeah.
What drove that? How did it happen?
I mean, for me, and I think it's true for other people, but it doesn't need to be. I think there was. I'm laughing because it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to tell everybody my own personal psychology. But, I think as a young boy, I was, precocious, would be recognized by teachers, student of the month, that kind of thing. My parents also went through a divorce at a young age, particularly when I was being recognized for those things. And I think it was...
How old were you?
I think it was like 7 or 8. And I think it probably resulted in me having a bit of a complex about wanting to kind of be recognized and get attention and feel positive at a time when there was a fair amount of darkness in the home around, the loss of this father and not being able to really understand what's going on. So I think that's a big part of it for me. I don't think that's it for everybody. A desire to feel like your life means something. I think things that people would see as like existential crises for people in their older age were like important to me as a boy. I was also, I was run over by a truck and almost died when I was 8, so this was right after the divorce was happening, run over by a truck. I was very conscious of my mortality for that reason and others. And radical politics was...
So you're a traumatized young man with daddy issues.
Boy, yeah.
Boy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I wouldn't call them daddy issues in the sense that I think that implies something in a kind of particular context, but
fair.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, mommy issues. If I'm being honest, it's probably more like wanting to perform and wanting to have this outsized impact, wanting to have, probably some of that narcissism of a sense of entitlement and grandiosity. I won't, I'm not going to lie. And I don't regret any of it in the sense that I love my life right now. So it's all part of who I am. Yeah. But if I had to look at it, I kind of go, those things were probably there. Probably, in San Francisco, not in San Francisco, but in Apocalypse Never, I talk about, I think that when I was most apocalyptic about climate change, I was, as a young man, not a boy.
Yeah.
I was probably dealing with more depression, some anxiety. I think there's so much going on in it, but I do think a feeling that your life is very significant, that your life has this incredible purpose. You're not just, eventual worm food, especially if you don't believe in God and you don't have a spiritual life, which I did not have at that age. I think that the radical politics became I don't think it was truly a spiritual I don't think it is a spiritual response. I think it's sort of pseudo-spiritual, but it clearly was addressing those same needs that I was not getting spiritually or maybe psychologically, but I was getting them through, or at least felt like I was getting them through radical politics.
What was your first entry point? Was it any of these folks like Abby Hoffman, or let's see who else we got here. Eric Mann. Was he the playbook for progressives? Was he part of your formation?
I don't know that book. Certainly I read Alinsky.
Yeah. Rules for Radicals in the Dad Saves America Prop Edition. Saul Alinsky. Apparently, I think Hillary Clinton was a big fan of this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was born in 71, so I grew up in the 80s, and that was a time of a really violent Central American conflict. And so I was reading articles about U.S. government support for death squads in El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, that were doing horrific things. I mean, if you just get to Guatemala,
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like, impaling pregnant women, it's like just brutal torture. And I blame the government for it, the Reagan administration for that. And we can get into like how much truth there is in that and some of the complexities there that I didn't see then that I do see now. But, there was real world, issues going on that I was concerned about, and wasn't alone. It was a very big concern for the broader left. That was sort of how I got in. I went to Nicaragua when I was 17. I mean, I was very adventurous. I was already sort of street smart at a young age. So
how did you do that? How did you, like, you're 17 years old. Are you living in you're in
Colorado?
Okay, you're in Colorado.
Grew up in Colorado.
How does that happen?
Very conservative town. I talked my principal into letting me go. I just was like, I want to go, and he was just a very. He didn't always. I had a lot of back then. Just as now, you might imagine, I had relationships with like the authority figures, like everywhere I go. But yeah, I mean, I just basically was like, I want to go to Central America for a couple months, in my senior year, and they basically like, okay, I mean, what are we going to do? So there was like a little radical English or a Spanish language school in a mid-sized city, just north of the capital in Nicaragua. And there we studied Spanish in the morning and then did like radical field trips during the day. I mean, it was a country that was in the process of a revolution in terms of a socialist revolution.
So is this is the Sandinistas? Is this the uprising of the Sandinistas at this point?
Yeah.
Lay that, because I know that this is also a group that Bernie Sanders, the Sandinistas, had expressed admiration for. So lay that out, because we're marching towards the president and Venezuela and your I think really interesting and important takes on that.
So a socialist insurrection overthrows the essential dictator of Nicaragua in 1979. I went 9 years later in 1988, and the whole region. I mean, for the left in Latin America, it was always Cuba, right? That was the heroes of the region that everyone admired. At the same time, you had the left sometime around, I think probably the 70s or 80s in Latin America, the left in Latin America saying we like Cuba, but we want to be democratic and we want to respect free speech. And this was very explicit by the Nicaraguan leaders. And there were people like Chomsky who, whatever you think of him, was genuinely, demanding those things, encouraging those things, criticizing the left when it was oppressive. Then after Central America, then I became very interested in Brazil, because Brazil is this colossus of a country. It's not, I mean, these little countries in Central America just don't matter like at a kind of global level. Brazil really matters. Plus I had this very inspiring left-wing leader named Lula, who I ended up interviewing a few years later, actually, as it happened to be. I also met Daniel Ortega when I was in Nicaragua. I kind of met them all.
But just before we move on to Brazil for a sec, so who were the Sandinistas? They were, and what was that conflict? Because that has come, like, when you start to Google all this stuff, people looking into this will come across that name in particular because of Bernie Sanders. And so, so who were they for? Who were they against? And what happened before you head to Brazil?
Yeah, this is this is a Latin America left at that time was very influenced by something called liberation theology, which was sort of Christian socialists, Christian Marxist radicals. They were just kind of weaving together a bunch of stories from really the Gospels and socialism, arguing that Jesus is a socialist. I mean, you can probably kind of predict what it is, but I mean, a very big literature. The Nicaraguan Sandinistas took the name from a guy named Sandino, who had fought the Americans when they had invaded around the beginning of the 20th century and successfully repelled them. I mean, it's an incredibly inspiring story of a guerrilla warfare in the early 20th century. Sandinistas, you kind of fast forward to the 60s, they kind of reconstitute. They do very good. I mean, to call it PR is to kind of like it's just too thin of a word. Like, they developed this whole mythology around Sandino and the Sandinistas and how it would be democratic but socialist, and it was just very exciting. And it was incredible to see. I think it's always incredible to see very radical governments in charge, because they just everything looks so different from how everything else looked. And that's how Nicaragua, felt at the time. And there was a lot of stuff that was really inspiring about it. when I was there. I
Like
think,
what was actually inspiring at the time?
I mean, the sense in which people were all in it creating something better for themselves, and that it was democratic. I mean, honestly, it's funny. I look back on it, like, the most exciting thing was the sense it was democratic, that people were doing this. They did have elections. Ortega, like everybody, went bad, and now he's been in power for, I think, like over a quarter century. Like, he got kicked out at one point, whatever. So, but it was early days, and so a lot of optimism about what they were going to be able to do.
So how long did you spend in Nicaragua? You're like, I'm going to go there for my senior year in high school, but you obviously
just the fall semester. Yeah.
And is that how long you stayed?
Yeah.
And then you came back. So you end up coming back down to Brazil. Lula is currently the president. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
currently still. I mean, he also went out of power and came back in, but
went to prison, came back.
Yeah.
No. How did you end up interviewing him? How did this even happen? And how old were you?
It's a great question. Right. Well, I became interested in Brazil. The State Department was offering language scholarships to learn Portuguese. It's not, the Spanish and Portuguese are very similar, so you can move easily from Spanish to Portuguese. I mean, it's hard, but you can do it. And so that was one summer. Then I went down there and I did a semester in college now in Brazil. And it was very easy to connect with. I mean, the left, and like, it's always like, I think, especially now that I'm, moved so much further away from it, the left is really dominant. I mean, it's just dominant culturally. It's like, and I think I was always surprised to see that. Like, I remember I was doing an internship there with a group of attorneys who were defending peasants in various land conflicts in the Northeast. I'm supposed to say subsistence farmers, but we called them, the words were peasants back then. And it was all very exciting. Like, the staff there read Foucault, and we talked about Foucault, we talked about Marx and Gramsci, and they're
all the greats,
all about praxis, and it was all theory, and it was just also very exciting. And in Brazil, Lula was a very famous figure already because he had led a series of strikes that helped to bring down the dictatorship in the late 70s, and then he runs for office in the 1980s. Lula ran, I think he was elected on his 4th time as president. So, I mean, he ran like 16 years in a row before finally winning. I met him when he had not won anything. I just interviewed him in his office. I was dating a radical left-wing Brazilian. I mean, it was just, we would go to the parties in Rio, and it was just, it was never difficult. Like, it was just, I think that, left-wing parties in Latin America are always looking for friends abroad, always looking for solidarity. It's a solidarity with these various left-wing groups. And the left has had a long tradition of internationalism, because true leftism or true Marxism, but also anarchism, would kind of view it as a global struggle against a global capitalist elite. So there's just a lot of openness to it. And I found myself in there. I will say the one thing is, I asked Lula directly whether he would impose Cuba-style censorship on the Brazilian people, and he said absolutely not. And when I started to have this most recent conflict with Lula, I talked about this a lot, and how this was a betrayal of what he had personally told me in 1994. So literally, 30 years, prior to the Twitter Files Brazil, I had interviewed Lula.
The one this past Friday, I did a video about Mamdani and Maduro, and one of the things that I very rarely hear talked about is the fact that Marxism, fundamentally as a philosophy, it's an export to the global South. It is not. It did not originate in the global South. It is a French salon's concocted utopian ideology that was not just export from Europe elsewhere, but exported by the sheer force of the Soviet Union. And in fact, economist and economic historian Phil Magnus had done some academic work on this to essentially model the path of Marx's popularity with and without the Soviet Union. And what he finds is that basically Marx, in terms of being referenced by other works, is just bobbling along with all these other sort of utopian scribblers until 1917. And the Soviet Union then creates like the Marxist Institute, and this there's like a publication, I think it's called Progressive Press, like that still exists to this day, that pushed Marxism, that pushes Marxism. Maybe it doesn't push it anymore, but it did during the Soviet period. So Marxism is a colonial project by definition.
That's interesting.
And I never hear people talk about it that way. It's always treated like it's always like Mamdani's father is like a Marxist at Columbia University, of course. And he's Mr. Anti-colonialism. That's his whole field of study. But it's like you're embracing the most like half the planet got run by the Soviet Union. This is a colonial enterprise.
Yeah, I think the Soviet Union had a big effect, particularly in the early 20th century. I will say I think a big part of it was just taking state power in 1917. I think people felt like they were like, wow, a big country becomes, radical and embrace socialism and Marxism.
Cuba at one point has like 20% of its GDP being funded by the Soviets.
For sure.
So like, I wonder how much it's even the export. I mean, how do you think about that?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, one of them is also that, the Soviet communism was discredited a couple times. I mean, first in the 30s when people learned about the Stalin show trials and the big massacres, again under Khrushchev, when Khrushchev, basically attacked, Stalinism and Leninism for a more moderate, form of state socialism. And then I think in Latin America, I didn't see much in terms of there was some Russian stuff in Nicaragua, but really the center of gravity was with the church. It was with the Catholic Church. It was with radical priests, radical liberation theologians. There was, because there's, as the church has an enormous, there's the Vatican, but then there's sort of stuff that people do, in these jungles of Nicaragua, and nobody's enforcing nobody's being like, that's not right.
Yeah. There's no John Paul II saying knock it off down there, guys.
Yeah, no. And then Brazil's Brazil, the left was these powerful labor unions. We now know that as soon as the Workers' Party, that's the Lula party, as soon as it comes to power in the Congress, it's involved in bribery and corruption right away. It was immediate. It wasn't and it's important to emphasize, they came to power on an anti-corruption ticket, same way as Hugo Chavez did in the late 1990s. So these guys all starred as anti-corruption. It's kind of a classic, the Animal Farm story, basically. But yeah, I don't think I think that Russia had an impact. I would say in Latin America, by the time you get to the 60s and 70s, there was pretty strong homegrown.
So it's you've got this Cuba effect, but then the virus spreads, the mind virus spreads. The Soviet Union's gone, but new generations of Columbia grads are more radical than ever. So,
and personally, my view is that the radicalism comes from something really deep inside of us. It's not something that's imposed. If it hadn't been Marxism or whatever, there would have been something else. It would have been. We have other varieties of radical leftism in the form of anarchism. I think anarchism is way more influential, for example, among West Coast leftists than traditional Marxism or traditional Marxist-Leninism. Is a big part of, the IWW had a lot of success. Anarchists had a lot of success late 19th century, early 20th century. But yeah, for me, the radicalism is coming from some deeply unmet, psychological and spiritual needs resulting from, what we call the death of God and secularization and the declining belief in traditional religion.
How, before we come to your run-ins with Venezuela, and that can take us into the present.
Yeah.
What is, in your view, radicalism? It's this word that I think means just to get to the root, right? Is that the
radical propaganda. That's the radicals' propaganda.
Is it?
We're just getting to the root of things.
It's the root causes we want to deal with.
I think Marx wrote that, and you hear that along the left. It's very self-congratulatory.
Great.
No. It's not extremism. We're just trying to get to the root of the problem. I appreciate. I think we all want to get to the root of the problem. You know what I mean? So it's
fair enough.
Yeah. For me, it changes a lot, obviously, these specific demands. But I think for me, if I had to define it, and my next book is on the left, and we look at these things, I think it's the inversion of traditional Judeo-Christian / Enlightenment. If you look at the Enlightenment as a kind of secularized Judeo-Christianity with its individual, moral conscience and a kind of equal justice before the law and meritocracy all being formerly Judeo-Christian or Christian ideas, I think it's really stemming from that, and that it's this, it's a desire, it's the picture that, we're born free and everywhere we're in chains because of society. That's Rousseau's idea.
Yeah.
That's the same idea for Marx or for anarchists or for all varieties of radicals. They're really taking kind of how things are run now and just inverting them. So they're sort of saying, well, capitalists make all these decisions. Those decisions should be made by the workers. You look at feminism and it kind of is like, we have the men have created the civilization and like men have a kind of specific role. Well, that should be reversed. That should be inverted. And so we just kind of go down the line. You see basically just a constant set of reversals of power. And this was all the way through the postmodernists where you sort of get this idea. Now, the practice is not those things.
Yeah.
But I think that's what they think they're doing, is that they think they have a true critique of why everything is so terrible in the world. And, terrible meaning there's inequality, there's suffering, there's oppression, there's, bad things happen to people. And they want to sort of say, it doesn't have to be that way. It's an anti-tragic vision, or as Thomas Sowell says, it's a unconstrained vision. It doesn't have to be that way. There doesn't have to be inequality, for example. Well, we're all born pretty different, we all get very different situations. And so, but a rejection of that and sort of this utopian view that it can all be better, but we just have to basically do the opposite of what the society is doing now. And I think the word revolution, to just turn over, is the right one for that.
It's funny that this might be the first time I really thought about revolution as literally just the turning over for the sake of it being upside down unto itself.
Right.
I mean, that does create the problem of you rotate, let's say, 180 degrees.
Right.
And then you're not satisfied with what results. Well, we'll just rotate again. Like it is endless in that way. So at the most base level, before you get to sort of the complete pure individual psychology of it, is it just pure critique? Is it the idea that I see something less than utopia right now, therefore let's flip the table and maybe utopia is underneath it? Is that all there is? Is that the drive?
You could say, the drive is a desire to feel powerful, the desire to, cast oneself as a hero in one's own story. I think that the radicalism is extreme, so it's exciting in that way. But I think the people that engage in it, certainly when I remember thinking about it, it was always that if there were problems, it was because we hadn't gone far enough. That was always or the problems are, why, renewables are not working. Well, that's obviously the problem of climate deniers, or there's homeless people are dying on the street. Well, that's because of Michael Shellenberger and him suggesting that this is a drug problem rather than a racism problem, or you kind of go down the list. These detransitioners say that they were abused by medical professionals and that they were delusional and thinking that they could change their sex. That's the fault, obviously, of right-wing extremists and bigots who are preventing people from getting those treatments. Like, it's just all self-referential. Everything that's wrong in society is a result of us not taking even more radical actions.
I mean, it does demand that you keep doubling down on something that's not working, which is weird.
because they think it's not working because we haven't gone far. It's the fault of their enemies and the system that it's so all these problems. It's very easy, people do it automatically. It's whenever you point out something, they'll be like, well, that's clearly because of my political enemies or the system or in some way. So they don't see themselves causing these problems. They're completely oblivious. It's not even. It's literally inconceivable that they could be causing this problem.
As you've been. I know because you talked about the book that you mercifully just finished, as I understand, right?
Yeah.
When is it coming out?
Never complain, never explain. So I'm not going to complain about it.
And is there actually like a finished title that's going to be the title?
Yeah, the title is "The Left's War on Reality," and it comes out April 27th.
Okay, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it is with my co-author Alex Gutentag.
Well, we'll probably have you back for when it's actually out and available.
That'd be great.
But okay, so if you're going to go to war on reality, you end up with the trouble that reality is reality, and so you're never going to win if it's you versus reality. If your goal is utopia, like the perfect society, the in the case of Marxist-Leninism, or really Marxism purely, is the stateless, classless, moneyless society where there's no property and we all own everything, including each other, or including the teeth in our mouths, as the sort of communist governors of Maoist China would tell villagers. No, the collective owns the teeth in your mouth. That doesn't have an end. So
right.
Does that make it just a kind of secular religion? Because, of course, a metaphysics can never be fulfilled here on earth. Like, as a Christian myself, it's like, no, well, I'm not. There's some other thing that's going to happen. I'm never going to get the full picture. I'm never going to get the whole story. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I mean, we're arguing that it's a pseudo-religion. That's a slight difference from my last two books, where I did call it a religion. Now I'm of the view, working with Alex and really looking at it more, that's really more of a pseudo-religion in the sense that it's actually taking an existing moral framework and inverting it, and also just attacking all of the sacred grounding of those systems. And then every time something goes wrong, then it's the fault of the system or your political enemies, and you just invent reasons for why that would be. But it's working. It's exercising that power because it's delivering real benefits to people, spiritually, psychologically, financially, socially. Socially is a huge part of it. I mean, it's Jonathan Haidt's observation that religion binds and blinds, that people don't want to lose all their friends. People don't want to lose their job. They don't want to be canceled. So there's all sorts of, it always depends on who you're talking about. There's the people that created these powerful ideologies. There's the people that sort of teach them, implement them, manage them, enforce them. And then there's just a lot of consumers of those ideologies. But yeah, you get downstream to the woman who was killed, in the ICE thing. And she's like, people won't like this, but I mean, honestly, she's a victim herself. She's clearly a victim of this left-wing ideology.
Have you met Hugo Chavez?
I worked for Hugo Chavez.
I remember reading that you were somehow involved.
Yeah.
You got it. So, okay. So how did this happen? I have my story, my deal. I interviewed an economist from South American economist. I think, is he from Peru? I can't remember. Hernando de Soto. Mm-hmm. And he told me a story, this is about a decade ago, that basically when Chavez came to power, he actually had a meeting with de Soto, because de Soto is like arguably the most famous South American economist.
Yeah.
And he said he actually had this pretty positive interaction with him where he said, no, what we need is better property rights and better contracts. The people can't fully utilize their capabilities because our contract and legal system is so bad. Property ownership is so like black market, barely defined. No, we can't. Our people, their people can't invest in themselves and hold on to it because we don't have essentially property rights, which is like the root legal material basis for Western modern capitalist free enterprise civilization.
Yeah.
And he said Chavez seemed interpersonally to be like interested in thinking maybe there's a path there. And then, of course, that's not where he went.
Right.
How did you end up getting connected? What did you work on?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that, because I think that there was a period there where Hugo Chavez was trying to be more moderate. And that's the period where I came in. I mean, he ran on really, so the context is Venezuela is entirely dominated by its oil industry. I mean, people put it down and are like, it's an oil company, in the guise of a nation. Yeah. But its dependence on oil is so total that the government has for decades subsidized gasoline, food, other things through the state-owned oil company. When oil prices are high, that works out great. When the oil prices go down, there's riots. And that's what happened in the 1980s. There was, some debt. Oil prices went down. They couldn't deliver. They had to cut. They thought they had to cut. And you had food riots, and you had people getting killed on the streets. And so it was bad. And that was also, there's a set of people out there now who are sort of being like, it was all fine before Chavez took over. Well, obviously not, because if it was all fine, then Chavez would not have been able to take over. He attempts a coup in the early 90s. Is sent to prison. I think he serves, I can't remember, not very long. And then they pardon him, which is amazing in and of itself, kind of wild. Probably shows like how decadent their own system had gotten, that they released this guy rather than keeping him in jail. He runs for president, enormously popular, wins. And I don't think anybody thinks that he stole that election, right? Like, he just wins. I think it was 98. There was then a coup attempt, a lot of suspicion that the U.S. was involved. It was pretty early days, so we weren't seeing big abuses of power. I had a friend that was advising him, and there was going to be an upcoming referendum in 2004 about whether they would get him out of office.
Yeah.
I didn't do very much. I mean, it was just 6 months, and I did meet with him, and I just told him, like, because he said, I will respect the results of the referendum. The opposition didn't believe him, and they were saying, no, you won't, because you're corrupt and whatever, you're going to steal it. All the signs pointed to the elections being fair and free. He said he was going to respect the outcome of the election. I encouraged him to say this in an op-ed for the Washington Post. It's basically all I was able to do. And nobody in Venezuela really liked it, because as soon as he published his piece saying, I'll respect the results of the election, the Post published their own piece being like, he's a tyrant and he won't respect the results of the election unless he wins the election. And that was the extent of it. I will say, I didn't want to maintain my involvement because I was already seeing flags with hammers and sickles. It was clearly the communists within that coalition were gaining more power. I mean, the thing about communism is that it facilitates corruption. I mean, in some ways, communism is just gangsterism, and the corruption is like kind of fundamentally what it is. But that was the extent of it. And probably the last, year, I was really, at that point, I wasn't even really that radical anymore. I was just still kind of, I think, romantic and had similar sympathies, but already kind of saw like, this is not headed in the direction that would be healthy.
Have you ever talked to Oliver Stone about Chávez?
No, I haven't.
I imagine you've met Oliver, right?
I have.
Yeah, because I know, for one thing, he recently did a documentary about nuclear energy that was very pro-nuclear.
Yes.
And he's even come to libertarian conferences. He's gone on his own ideological journey,
yes.
It seems like to me.
Yes.
That's a conversation that we've got to somehow facilitate, because I wonder, he probably
did like a pro-Chávez documentary.
He
right?
did. He did like an interview series with him, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, obviously, there's a whole litany of sort of radical progressive politicians at the Mamdani swearing in or inauguration. Susan Sarandon was in the crowd.
Right.
Fan of Chávez.
Yeah.
What's his name? Penn is Sean Penn.
Yeah.
Famously, recently was talking about him in glowing terms on Bill Maher's podcast.
There was hope that Chávez would use the oil revenues to benefit the people. That was the basic pitch, and it didn't happen. I think the other thing that I didn't really understand then, that I understand really well now, just 22 years of experience, is that the system is corrupt all the way down. And this is why I'm actually against intervening, any additional intervention in Venezuela. It's not because I don't care about Venezuela. I really love Latin America as part of it. Like, I love speaking Spanish. I love speaking Portuguese. I have a lot of friends and relationships. I mean, I lost a lot of left-wing friends, gained more on the right, but really do care a lot about Latin America. But I think that people don't understand about both Latin America and places like Sub-Saharan Africa or India is that it's not just like, oh, some corrupt people came to power. It's like the whole system is set up in a corrupt way. So to give you an example of it, to get a job, sometimes you'll get here's the classic thing. You'll get a job somewhere. The person that gives you the job, or the person that hires you, expects you to give them 10 or 20% of your salary. And it works that way the whole way down.
Just forever?
Yeah. Yeah. Or
just they get a
or
vig
there's some
for
agreement, or it's like exactly. Or the other one is in India, you don't pay for your electricity directly, you pay your landlord, then the landlord bribes the person at the utility to provide power to your shanty town. So when that is set up like that, it is it's so confounding. You can't figure out how to create you get growth sort of despite that corruption. So it's not to say you can't grow. You look at other places like Korea and probably a bit of Japan. Let's stick with Korea. A few big families control it. So there's definitely some corruption in contracting, but they actually build amazing products. They're building, Samsungs and LGs and in Brazil, the corruption got to the point, it got to Sub-Saharan Africa levels where you're supposed to be, billions of dollars were going to build a refinery and just would get diverted. And so when the Venezuelans were staying on top of this oil company that's just at high oil. I mean, I think the time the oil prices were high, just cranking out cash upon cash every month. I mean, they're just stealing money. And then when the oil prices crash, they I mean, it's ironic because it was a more liberal government, less radical in the 80s. But once the oil prices crash, whatever they say is the music ends and like a musical chairs, and there's just no room for anybody to sit down, and so the whole system comes to a collapse. And that's the context in which to understand Maduro. Not a defense of Maduro at all, but I mean him like like the leader that was overthrown or that was heavily protested in the late 80s, dealing with a situation where they just suddenly have half as much money as they had a year or two previously.
You said that communism gives rise naturally to corruption and sort of mobsterism.
Gangsterism, yeah. I mean, it kind of is gangsterism.
I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Why? From your perspective, lay out your argument for that. For why that is. Because that, for the person that, there's like two versions of how you hear communism. One is, you're utopian and you really think it's a goal to be pursued. The lesser version is it's great in theory, but not in practice. And then, of course, there's those that are just, like anti-commie. But for those that find it at least intriguing, why do you think it's doomed to become gangsters, mobsters, corrupt?
I mean, there's a way in which I think, to really simplify it, I think there's just two basic systems. There's our system, which is, there's problems with it, but it aims to be a meritocracy, equal justice under the law. The best person is hired for a particular job. The most competent person is hired for the job. The judge is going to make a decision on the merits of the case, not on who pays a bigger bribe to him. That's our system. Then there's just every other system, which is like, it's your connections, it's your family members, it's who do you bribe, it's not being decided on rational, modern, these are pre-modern forms of organization. Gangsterism, the classic gangster organization is a family. Mm-hmm. If you think of like a classic gangster scheme, it's to provide protection to a bunch of businesses. They're not actually providing protection. They're actually threatening to destroy those businesses if the businesses don't give them a share of their money. So it's just it's a racket, and they're not providing any need. If you providing universal security that everybody's contributing to through their taxes, that's your police system, and that's what you have in a modern rational system. But there it's just it's just gangster rules. So communism was just providing. In some ways, I just kind of go, communism is just providing a particular confusing and misleading story to people in order to get them to go along with basically a reversion away from liberal democratic Lockean Western democratic systems back to this much older form of tribalism. But instead of saying, oh, we're the Hutu and we're going to support all the Hutu, instead you say, oh, we're the communists and we're going to look out for everybody.
You're channeling Friedrich Hayek in that, right? Because he if I remember correctly, he's not the clearest writer, but he said it was something to the effect of socialism is like the system that like leads us towards an older tribalism that we have only been able to achieve what we have achieved by escaping that, by being like, no, well, actually, it's being partial and being groupish is just base nature. Like you only get to build big, complicated things like societies and civilizations if you can somehow have enough trust in the rules, in the contracts,
right?
That we can be anonymous in a certain extent. This northern Italian economist, Alberto Mingardi, has become a friend of mine. And I asked him, because, we're talking about families and gangsterism. I'm entirely Southern Italian genetically. So it's like, I actually found out recently we had a little more mob in my family than I realized. Looking back, it's like, you mean Uncle Jerry was like a mobster? It's like, oh, I thought we were clean. But I asked him, why is the North-South divide economically in Italy the way it is? Why is the South poor? Because it's like the South is poor. Right. The North is rich, Milan. South is poor, Sicily. And he said that basically the people of the South in Italy, for a lot of historical reasons and whatever, and unknown reasons, maybe just being lazy because it's warmer, but they just don't trust anyone outside the family. So they can never build anything big.
Yes. Massive. Right. I mean, that's what the Enlightenment revolution was all about, right? That you treat your citizens, I mean, arguably it's going on earlier with the rise of nations, but, nationalism gives rise to democracy. It's the sense in which, that you don't favor your family, you favor, anybody who's best for the job. I mean, that's think about how radical that is as a change.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the success of capitalism. I mean, it's so much more efficient to find who the most efficient thing is among the entire population rather than just your 5 cousins. So I mean, Hayek's book, by the way, what was his famous book called?
There's several. I mean, like the Road to Serfdom.
The Road to Serfdom,
probably the most famous.
Which is brilliant because the title itself is suggesting that reversion would be happening. That you would go back from capitalism to feudalism, and I think that is exactly what you see with the So part of me was like, when Trump was like, we're going to run Venezuela, I was like, I don't even know what that would mean. Like you would, because the idea would be like the way Venezuela is run is on patronage networks, bribes, who it's inconceivable how you would it's not even clear how you would begin to replace that. Because what makes our system work is that it's in our consciousness, like that we're going to behave in these particular ways, that we're not going to ask our employees to kick back 10%. Now, it's not because we're scared of being caught. It's like we literally you wouldn't even think of doing that. Like it's not even something that would cross your mind. And so there's a level of, the social trust, that nation level, kind of commitment or across nation when you're in a market economy. Yeah, I mean, it's just obviously much more efficient, outperforms socialism, but it shows the power of that particular story and the desperation of people in these particular contexts where that story, will start to make sense to people who are desperate and see that the supposedly capitalist market system, like Venezuela had, supposedly before the 90s, wasn't working for them.
One of the things, and I want to come fully to all of your reaction and your argument about what's happened with the Maduro essentially the capture and the claims that are being made by the administration, which are kind of all over the place. But there is one thing about at the highest level of like philosophical abstraction is you mentioned earlier that study about how essentially like progressive left of center people would tend to favor the outsider, whereas more conservative people tend to favor the parochial, the inside, the family, the group, the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about like the base level left right, like that goes all the way back to the French Revolution. And in that sense, free enterprise, like large scale coordination involving things like firms and big democratic nations I think this is why we call this movement historically liberalism, right? It is like, you said it, I'm not favoring my groupish family. There's a universalism. We're all created equal. Oh, we're a nation of laws. And so actually, if anything, maybe I don't even want to work with my family because then that's going to be all compromised. So instead of I'm Mr. Smith and here's my son, Smith Jr., you're going to go do your own thing. You're going to make a name. You're going to make a name for yourself instead of adopt the name like Smith because we are Smiths. How do you understand that tension there? Because there's we're going through something like a new world order, if you will, like that liberal order post-war that was like the liberal consensus, which included essentially free enterprise to some extent.
Right.
That's breaking down and it's changing into something else, or it's fracturing or something.
Right.
And I feel like this Venezuela, these like Don Road doctrine moves that Trump is doing is maybe even accelerating that breakdown.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm sorry. I'm throwing like thesis level diatribes
there's
at
like
you.
There's like 7 things in there. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of it is that, I mean, there's always this idea that like radical leftism and liberalism are really different. You know, like liberalism respects democratic institutions. You know, radical leftism is sort of illiberal. It kind of gets rid of democracy to have the dictatorship of the proletariat. You know, in Marxist terms. That's true, although there's some really important similarities. Like with liberalism, there's like all these like kind of essential goods like autonomy, you know, and freedom. And they're sort of posited as these things that you just have and they're absolute and they're unending. I think the conservative tradition would say, no, they're actually constrained by things, you know. So you kind of go, the big one is the nation. And you know, after World War II, when we had an interest in globalization, we really wanted to expand liberalism, expand liberal democracy, and expand free markets around the world. And that occurred, you know, for 80 years. Started to become problematic increasingly, first in the 70s as Japan and Germany came online with their own manufacturing, then in a big way after the 90s when China comes online. And you start to get American elites that no longer feel that allegiance to our working class. And this is one of the things that observers of civilization, Toynbee and others will say, yeah, when your elites have more solidarity towards foreign elites and foreign working people than they do towards their own working people. I don't think he says working people, but he says kind of your masses.
Yeah.
You got a big problem. I mean, you got a divided country. So I think at best, I think that
that's like the Davos man. You've got like the John Kerry types who they'll go abroad, like literally John Kerry, and go to Davos and say, well, you know, the problem with America is that we're ungovernable because we have this First Amendment.
Right. And he wants to align the First Amendment. He wants to lower the free speech standards so we can align with Europe. You know, that's where it ended up going. Because you're trying to figure out how do you go from liberalism, which is all about freedom and free speech, and how do you go from that to the censorship industrial complex? So I think the first thing we see now, though, is that the nation emerges it just comes back in a really big way as like this organizing principle. That was until the Venezuela intervention by Trump. That was always pretty much associated with withdrawing from foreign forever wars, withdrawing from entanglements. Well, the first sign that was going to be more complicated than that was with Trump's national security strategy, which came out in November of last year. And that was a very interesting document because it said not only are we going to pull back from Europe, we're also going to pull back from Asia, including pulling back from unnecessary antagonisms with China. So that earlier Trumpian Marshall attack towards, you know, relationship to China, we're going to stand up to them, it's really gone. I mean, every time you hear Trump talk about Xi, it's always like, my friend Xi, we get along great, you know, Xi and me, whatever. It's like, because I think he says quietly, you know, we don't have the leverage. Like that China has all this leverage over us now, you know, over the chips and rare earths and whatnot. So he's been very careful about that. I mean, when he had the big blow up in the White House with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, one line that stuck with me is when he said to Zelensky, he goes, you don't have the cards. You're not holding the cards. I mean, Trump is fundamentally a deal maker. And I think he looks at his cards, he looks at China's cards, and he goes, I don't have the cards. That became strategy where they were going to basically pull back. That means Japan and Korea needing to play a role defending the South China Sea against China. It means the Europeans, doing whatever they want to do with Ukraine, but us reducing our commitments, but then having an expanded, you know, role in Latin America for all the reasons that they gave. It was a little muddled. I agree with you. They gave all these different reasons. I think it's just that, though. They're like, we want to exercise power in this hemisphere. I have concerns about that, particularly in the case of Venezuela, for the implications of it just practically. What I find refreshing about it is that it clarifies that the world is might makes right, and at the global level, it's not a liberal democratic world order. It's a self-help system, as Kenneth Waltz, the great founder of international relations, calls it. So it's much more realpolitik. You know, there were some people who are like, you know, it's violating international law. It's like international law is just irrelevant. Like it doesn't, like people acknowledge that that's just a myth of the post-war system that's now disappearing.
We hear these calls to international law. And I know you're not like an international lawyer, but given the amount of work you do on the international stage, why do you say that's sort of a myth? What's your take on that?
It's sort of PR to justify a particular system. You know, countries violate international laws like all the time in their foreign policy. And sometimes we care about them, and it works as propaganda. We go, oh, Russia violated international law when it invaded Ukraine, therefore we have to do something about it. It works on some people. Similar arguments have been made for U.S. overthrows of governments around the world, that they were sort of violating laws and we'd come in and need to change them.
Team America World Police.
Yeah. When the New York Times had this long interview with Trump in the Oval Office the other day, and they were sort of asking him, well, doesn't what you're doing undermine international law? And it's kind of like, it might, but it wasn't really like international law was a thing anyway. But what it means is that, like, you would have to, countries like, you would probably start to need different justifications for doing different things than just that they violated international law. I mean, they were able to get away with that for like 80 years, even though it's inconsistently applied. But now it just seems like it's much clearer that nations, including the United States, are going to pursue self-interest over whatever international law says, because who's going to enforce that international law against us? Like the aliens? I mean, it's like we're the most powerful.
Right. The UN.
Yeah, the UN exists as at least the most powerful body, and the Security Council exists as a function of the great powers. So that part, I think, is really important and maybe like under-theorized, the extent to which something I very rarely say, because so many things are overly abstracted. But I mean, there is a way in which, like, that is a big deal, where you're like, there's not really international law to speak of anymore. It's not going to be it's going to be of diminishing power in terms of justifying or making decisions on what to do at a foreign policy level. Just because I think we've been so caught up with this particular drama in Venezuela, but the implications are, I think, massive.
So we have this leverage-centered approach that Trump's taken to the world. I think I think you're right, except that I have no idea. Like, right, it's for me personally, and I think for most Americans, international issues are so hard to, if you're being honest with yourself, to feel like you've got a good opinion that's worth holding on to firmly, because the distance, the complexity is magnified that much more. You've got other cultures. You've got this like what's the right thing? Like, the history's not that much of a guide for a lot of reasons, because we overblow things like World War II in our own telling of history to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think the narrative making about America, about the international order, is a kind of fiction because of the way we tell ourselves the story of World War II?
Yeah, I agree it's a fiction. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's actually gotten in the way of actually thinking clearly about what is the right thing to do, both for our national interest and then from a, human rights. I mean, I don't want to lose the idea that we should be concerned about human rights in other countries. I just think you need to kind of understand that, like, especially after everything that's happened. I mean, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Egypt are not better off after they had the Muslim Brotherhood take over, So, and so everyone, there was an amnesia, it almost feels like, which is sort of like, no, we just remove the top guy and then everything's going to be fine. I mean, if I had to look at just this particular case of Venezuela, if it's okay to go there.
Let's really dive in.
Yeah.
So, you with all this context in a way, as we sit here, Maduro is in custody in New York. This unilateral, quick, kind of crazy thing. It is like technically impressive to fly in and grab the head of state of this, like,
sure, yeah,
failed nation. Even they still have a military. They got a bunch of crazy looking thugs that are prepared to, like, presumably keep this from happening.
Right.
There's Venezuelans cheering in the streets in Venezuela and America. You're not cheering. You're pretty worried. So lay it all out.
About it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. First, it's important to understand that, like, the people that really are capable of running the oil industry and running things all left. I mean, it's like 8 million people have fled since 2014, I think. So you've had the elite classes leave. So to really, I think, run things, you're going to have very skilled engineers and people come into the country. You saw at the White House last week, one of the oil companies was like, we worry about our people being kidnapped. Like, we worry about security. There's people may know, like, 80% of their oil reserves are in the Amazon. It's terrible oil. It's really heavy oil. It's like the worst place in the world ecologically to be getting oil. It's, I mean, just imagine like if it's a security issue, then suddenly you're in jungle guerrilla warfare, just protecting oil operations, all of which adds to the cost. And so just at a cost level, I'm not sure that any of that makes sense, particularly since, we have a kind of a crummier oil in Canada, called tar sands. We also, environmentalists shouldn't love it, particularly when you compare it to like fracked oil, which is, this sweet light crude. It's a much superior oil, requires less processing.
Like out of like the Permian Basin and that kind of stuff.
Environmentally, the impacts, despite the claims, are much less, but significantly more than the Amazon. There's another part of Venezuela called the Maracaibo region where they do have easier to get oil. It's already producing better. It's already kind of fine. But then you get to I think that there's been this idea that somehow we can just do things to increase oil production without addressing the fundamental governance problems. And that's where I'm saying, like, I don't know how that would work. I mean, because you have to have security, and security is a function of the state. So if the state is kind of fundamentally broken, then you're going to need a new state. And how do you impose a new state? Well, now you're in a conversation about regime change and military action and overthrowing governments. Nation building. We're back to Iraq. I mean, in terms of like who's there, remember, like the people that really hated Chavismo have left. So now you're left actually with people that are much more supportive of Chavismo. The opposition has been famously divided for, I think, over 30 years. Like it's just, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Like they can't unite behind it. Trump acknowledged that himself when they said, what about the Nobel Prize winner Machado, who just got the Nobel Prize and is Venezuelan? And Trump just goes, she doesn't have the support in Venezuela, so we're not going to work with her.
Is he, in your reading of the circumstances, is he correct? Because didn't she like win the I know there was like an
guy supposedly won.
What exactly do we really know about election outcomes in Venezuela?
I don't doubt at this point that there was corruption. I mean, I should say I haven't looked at it, so okay. I might be wrong. But I wouldn't be surprised if they had stolen the election. And so that's, that could very well be. I think that everything I understand about it is that like that opposition candidate that got those votes, Machado, these other folks, they do not have a majority. They don't have the country with them. I think if they did, then Trump would have been more, inclined to go with Machado. Instead, you have this person that was the vice president that's now in charge, Delcy Rodriguez. I think there's, to be able to govern, you have to have legitimacy. And so if Trump is saying, I'm in charge, and Pete Hegseth is running Venezuela, every time he says that, he's just making the current president seem less legitimate and less stable. For her perspective to keep in power, she's going to need to do things to maintain power, which I would think would be all the things that we wouldn't want. There were some reports that there were some political prisoners released, but there's other reports that there really wasn't very many of them. And meanwhile, I think it was on Saturday that the State Department, said all Americans should leave Venezuela. So, I mean, it's not like they got rid of Maduro and suddenly the government changed. You still have a Maduro-based government. And you can kind of force them to do things with this gumbo diplomacy. We're going to control exports. But I mean, how long are we going to do that? Like, what's the game plan for like even just a midterm, much less long-term proposal? I got to tell you, I didn't get any sense that anybody had thought that out in the Trump administration. That I think they fell in love with this really cool military operation. I don't doubt it. It's amazing. We're amazing at that. It sounds like they were innovative, like amazing. But I don't think there's an excuse for not having thought out like what is going to happen there, because literally just to impose free elections on that country would basically require like a military invasion. They have these things called colectivos, which are just like the radicalized Chavistas.
Yeah, like red guard mob, mobster red guards, like scarier than the normal red guards.
Yeah. So you have, first of all, a very high, absurdly high level of crime and violent crime. And Venezuela is always very dangerous place. And now you've got kind of gangs running around enforcing orthodoxy. There can't be free speech in that situation. There can't be free elections. So what are we doing here? Like, how is it going to work? I guess will say if I could paint a more positive picture, I think it would look like, some sort of positive exchange to kind of help grow the industry and make maybe over time to be very gradual, not try to force elections when they're not ready, build up relationships, be extremely patient. You've got a dynamic. Then I think people would be like, oh, but the bad guys are still in power. So you've got this kind of fundamental dilemma, which is that
it's a Faustian bargain, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, it's kind of like no great options here. And then I just think in terms of the Trump administration's own view that everything should be America first and that this should be like really necessary for the Americas, I don't see that at all. I do not see, when I think about like what Americans need, they need cheap housing, they need better education, they need cheaper healthcare, they need we need to deal with the affordability problem. I don't see that being solved in Venezuela. Oil prices were like last I checked or last week were $56 a barrel. That's very low historically. I think all of us can remember when they're over 100. So
not to mention that's in present dollars. So that's not accounting for inflation.
Right. And, and I think Trump, look, and hands off, I think Trump did a great job bringing oil prices down. I think Chris Wright, the energy secretary, did a great job. I agree I believe there should be low energy prices. You get much lower than that, you're going to bankrupt a bunch of companies in Texas. So it's kind of like, and I kind of go, when I was very concerned about high oil prices, I think it's a really big problem. I'm very happy with under 60. I think most Americans at that point go from 56 to 50. What are you really getting in terms of cheaper gasoline? Not much, but it could bankrupt a bunch of the oil and gas industry in Texas. A sidebar, maybe one of the most interesting things that nobody realizes is that the Texas oil industry votes against its interests. Contrary to what the left thinks about the oil industry, that it's all greedy and that's why they deny climate change, blah, blah, blah. Texas oil and gas, I've asked them about this. I was like, you guys do better under Biden. I mean, just look at the oil prices. Yes. You guys do much better. They supported Trump because they actually share his values. Anyway, I think it's a very interesting, underappreciated point. But yeah, I just don't see this. I don't see it headed in a direction where I think it's in America's interest to be in Venezuela long term.
I mean, the oil elements you're talking about, and I have several friends and supporters of our organization. We're a nonprofit. I'm proud to say I've got people who've made their money in energy that are contributors to what makes this show possible. They've said the exact same thing. They're like, oh, we've always done better as an industry in terms of bottom line money in our pocket under Democrats who claim to hate the oil industry. And the reasons are so obvious. It's like, well, if you're the seller of a product and in comes politicians who say they don't want any more production of that product, they are saying they want no more competition for your product and they want higher prices for your product. So you're going to make more money.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But I think that, I think the Trump administration didn't really think this out. I don't think they didn't think about what the implications were in Venezuela. I don't think they thought of the implications of making, first of all, I don't think they're going to be able to get a bunch of cheap oil out of Venezuela. I mean, some of it out of that Maracaibo region I mentioned, sure, Javier Blas and Bloomberg had a really good column talking about how you could increase oil production from there. But then it's like, but then do you want to do that? And like, why would you want to do that? I mean, yeah, arguably our reserves are diminishing in the Permian and Texas and other shale regions of the United States. But I mean, we have a lot of oil in the United States. There's still a lot. We're nowhere like we do not need to be looking for new oil. So yeah, I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, it'll be interesting to watch. I worry that it's the kind of thing that could really undermine the president and the president's agenda.
It seems like what we're dealing with Venezuela is something that economists have long called the resource curse, right? Which is, weirdly, despite what everybody likes to talk about on the left about resources and communism, having like money be printed out of the ground, there's like only one place where that hasn't produced autocracy, and that's Norway. And they're very strange. And they've got their own thing that's not replicatable.
Right.
But everywhere else, if you've got money pumping out of the ground, it's kind of a curse. And you're almost better off being like an island formerly run by the British with no natural resources, like Singapore or Hong Kong.
Well, look at Japan. I mean, it has nothing. And it's like one of the richest, most innovative countries, or not innovative, I should say, one of the richest, most developed countries in the world. I guess it can be innovative. I don't want to put down my Japanese friends.
It used to be all the cool electronics.
Walkman.
Sony, Toyota.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think so. I mean,
that was a real Bay Area moment you just had.
I remember Japan. Yeah, I mean, I think like the thing about the resource curse, and there's like a variant of it called Dutch disease, which is also very interesting, but it's also just governance problems. I mean, we have the most oil and gas in the United States of any country. I mean, and we are handling our wealth very well because we are a system of rules. We got good governance. So it goes back to the earlier problem. If you have terrible governance and you have a bunch of natural resource, it's going to corrupt and undermine your society. Dutch disease is when the economy becomes too dependent on one industry.
Yeah.
So Venezuela had both. It had the resource curse, and then it had this variant of the Dutch disease. Yeah, I mean, it's and so you don't have a population that's been educated or that's working in manufacturing or other service sectors. They haven't been. So it's really. It's a really difficult situation for Venezuela.
I mean, the U.S. has never been. I mean, we were already, heading towards being the richest country before. People today, sitting here in 2026, it's easy to forget this, but for up until only like 150 years ago, when people would come across oil coming out of the ground, it was a nuisance because there wasn't anything useful to do with it.
Right.
Like there's always this sort of language, this sort of Paul Ehrlich resource nonsense.
Yeah.
We're running out of resources. It's like, well, a resource is defined by whether we have a use for it or not. So like it used to just be like we used to take this oil and make kerosene for lamps and then dump the byproduct into the rivers. That byproduct was called gasoline.
Oh yeah. Well, and then natural gas was considered garbage. They would just flare it. You're going for the oil. What do we need all this gas for? Now gas is like one of the most prized fuels in the world.
So there's this whole, I think the thing that the U.S. had, even with our abundance of natural resources, is that we never had one in particular.
Well,
it was always
like
like a mix
governance.
Of things.
And the other thing about Latin America, I learned this when I first went to Brazil, and it was like such an aha moment. We had this we had good governance, Lockean system, balance of powers, best in the world. I mean, I've now traveled around the world.
We're British.
I mean, it's actually even better than the British system, right? They were like, because the British had to deal with all the past encumbrances and whatnot, but they got to start fresh, clean piece of paper. The second most important part of that was the Homestead Act, which did exactly what we were talking about with Hernan de Soto, giving people private property rights if they developed that land. That was just a massive economic engine. That explains American economic growth and prosperity, along with that good governance for much of the 19th century going on. The Latin American countries, because the Spanish and Portuguese crowns, they didn't do Homestead Acts. They instead divided up their countries and then gave away those chunks of the country to the nobility. And so there was so productivity, they were idle, there was not an incentive to develop those areas. One side benefit is that a lot of the Amazon is still standing because of the underdevelopment, but nonetheless, that is like a huge problem. It's a similar problem in other parts of the world where the lack of private property rights means that if you have oil or gas under your land, there's no incentive for you to permit a rig to drill for it, whereas you do have that in the United States. So yeah, it's a really boring conclusion, but it's really just true, which is just like institutions and governance are kind of the main event when it comes to human success.
The thing, when you take that seriously, and when you take the like miracle of America seriously, like that, to say here we are, this country that for all its faults had a sort of like this incredible birth, this lucky birth out of being like kind of the best of the best, like the British Empire, most benevolent prior to the American, objectively for all its faults. And then we're like the radical freedom fighter, philosopher kings, this group of men, like Hamilton, Jefferson, John Adams, the founders.
Incredible.
Unbelievable stroke of luck of history.
Yes.
And then we sit here 250 years after that Declaration of Independence in 1776. Now we sit here 2026. And a man after Maduro's own heart, Zohran Mamdani, is elected the mayor of the biggest city in the country, the most important city in America, maybe the world.
Yeah.
There was to come back to all of my fun 60s props. There is a great one in here. Let me find the bookmark because it's in this, where was it? It was basically like, any fool can run for mayor. Chapter 9. In the, euphoric revolution nonsense.
Jerry Rubin, do it. Yeah.
Jerry Rubin, just do it. It's, this is said lovingly. Jerry Rubin has written the Communist Manifesto of our era.
Yeah. That's meant as praise.
That's
right?
praise. That's praise.
He became an investment banker, by the way, just so you know.
Did he?
Yeah.
Did he literally become?
Yeah, he did. He did.
So
Yeah.
that's
kind of that tells you a little. It tracks. No, it really does track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You now, instead of like growing out of that, you get worse or you become the mayor of New York City. So how do you understand where what's happening? I mean, this comes back to your book. It's hard to make sense of that. It's hard to make sense of our biggest city sort of decisively electing a communist.
Right.
Who's now putting in like crazy up-talking lunatics who want to socialize the society, and
right,
despite the fact that their mothers have like multi-million-dollar homes, like the whole thing is
because their mothers have multi-million-dollar homes. Yeah, I there's so much to say about what's happening there. I mean, I think first, just there is, because you can tell a historian's histories in a lot of different ways, but there is. Powerful individuals, and he is a very powerful individual, should not be underestimated. He's incredibly charismatic. He's very good at smiling. He's incredibly articulate. He managed at a perception level all of this crazy things he said without, it. And to your point, like New Yorkers were not frightened away as they should have been by this really crazy rhetoric. The other thing to point out, he had very weak competition. So it's also like if he had someone more moderate that was equally charismatic, he may not be there right now. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is just, look, this is the alliance. We see this in Europe more than we do here, an alliance between radical Islamicists and leftists. And you would, rationally, you'd be like, well, the radical Islamicists are going to murder you all when they get into power. So like, why are you in that alliance? And it's because they're both anti-civilization. They both hate Western civilization for similar and different reasons. I think the other part of it is that, he's offering a really powerful story of resentment and envy, which the classic critique, the psychological critique of the left from Nietzsche to Thomas Sowell to others is that, these are sort of millennials, who were probably upper middle class, honestly, a lot of them they were in New York. Brooklyn went very heavily towards him.
Right.
They worry that they won't be able to they can't afford the apartment that they grew up in. They're not making nearly their money that they're making doesn't go nearly as far as their parents' money did. And they're looking for some advantage in terms of affordability. On the one hand, I think we all can appreciate that. Unfortunately, the solutions are things like rent control, which make rents more expensive and more scarce. The other stuff, like grocery stores, it's terrible. It's probably not the end of the world. The thing that really weirded me out about Mamdani was his victory speech after he won the election. He behaved, and it appeared authentic. He appeared genuinely angry at how Muslims had been treated in the United States. I find that offensive. We treat Muslims in the United States better than Muslims are treated basically anywhere in the world. There's no country that's ever, it can't be said enough. No country has ever respected dignity and human rights of people of different races and religions like the United States. It's unprecedented. So for him to kind of get that that flash of anger that he showed, I found it pretty disturbing. I have to say, I wasn't even able to articulate why I found it so disturbing. It wasn't just that like it's false. Like the United States is just by every comparison the best place to be to practice, for anybody of any religion. But it scared me a little bit, like that there's a real darkness there.
You see it in his father, right? You see his father is this radical, anti-colonial Marxist who says, look, this is the kind of end whiteness type of stuff that goes on that part of the radical left.
His dad said that the Nazis were inspired by American colonialists. It's gross. The Nazis, Lebensraum, where they were taking over large parts of Poland and other parts of Europe in order to resettle them. That was an extermination program. It included the Eisengruppen, murdering all the peasants that gave way to the Holocaust. American settlers certainly did bad things in the West. I'm not suggesting that it was fine. And I agree that it actually was a genocide. I don't think that there's no evidence that they went out being like, we're going to just cause a genocide. That we're going to
mostly smallpox, wasn't it?
There was a lot of disease.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, my in the early 18th century, my ancestors were fleeing persecution in Europe, and I'm sure there were some clashes with the Indians. But I mean, you have basically people coming in and trying to farm land, and people that are using it all as big hunting grounds, going to have a conflict there. That's really different than the Nazis, and I think that just showed. I mean, that was his dad, and he's not responsible for his dad. But yeah, Mamdani, I think I saw a flash of real darkness there that I was not sure was there, but I feel like people should be alarmed by that guy because I think he showed his true self in that speech.
I mean, one of the things that is particularly striking about his inauguration, and also totally understandable, is he is going in the opposite direction of what we always hear, which is once you use the radical rhetoric, and then once you sort of actually get the job, you act a little more like an adult and you back off the radical rhetoric that's like to try to get your door knockers excited. Oh, we're going to seize the means of production. And then you say, well, no, we're going to encourage small business or whatever. He's talking about the warmth of collectivism. He's talking about the era of big government is back. He's talking about governing as a proud socialist. And yes, it's New York, but it's also like we already had the Maoist revolution, cultural revolution. We already had the gulags. We already had the collapse of the Soviet Union. You're not LaGuardia. LaGuardia was like calling himself a socialist or whatever before any of that, when it was all still possibility. Mm-hmm. Is it just the death of our education system? Is it just that we've just become like historically ignorant, or is it deeper than that?
I don't think. I mean, I don't think his voters think that any of that is even conceivable. I mean, they're just, and if anything, they kind of will. I think there are ways in which voters like it when their politicians say extreme things because it signals to them that they're going to really push their agenda once they're in office. But I don't think that the voters are support that kind of radicalism. I mean, these are some of the richest people in New York. Like they're not going to want to give up their, property. I don't know how hysterical to be about it. I just looked at him at that speech and was like, he's got real darkness in there. And then where are the voters going with it? I mean, yeah, suddenly it's acceptable for, voters to have, a guy that did not disavow his communist, the things he said before in praise of communism. Is this the direction of the Democratic Party? And in some ways you're like, look, if the focus were genuinely on bringing down prices, like that's great to have the parties competing over that. I mean, that's something that's in all the people's interests. So yeah, it'll be, I don't know. I mean, at the end of our current book, we talk about where the left could be headed. And just one of the things we point out is like, you don't take them at their word because their agenda is not what they say it is. It's a much more radical agenda so that you could expect that, you might talk about affordability, but it almost certainly would result in higher prices.
Well, I mean, to bring it back to South America, the society that seems in our history to be the biggest cautionary tale from South America isn't Venezuela, it isn't Brazil. To me, it's Argentina, because when you look at the turn of the last century, Argentina was basically neck and neck with the United States in terms of like wealth and income per capita. I haven't been to Buenos Aires, but I understand it to be like a beautiful modern, maybe not modern, but a beautiful city, modern in a past 200 years sense. And income, the left populist Peronists who just basically do maybe even less radical version of Mamdani in a certain sense, and destroy the country. Slowly over time, destroy it. It doesn't have the same resource curse problems as Venezuela. it's actually like quite Western. Like I think 60% of the population of Argentina is like genetically and ethnically Italian.
Right.
It's like Italy too.
Right.
They have this sing-songy, more Italian flavor to their Spanish.
Yeah.
Like, do you fear that Amerigentina is a high risk for our future in this country?
That we become like Argentina.
Yeah, like the counter reaction to the Trump derangement syndrome 2.0. I mean, they put up Tim Walz for the VP last time. What are we going to get next time?
Right.
And what if they win? What if it's like, a lot of Trump's policies end up hurting, or the economy swing. Anything can happen these days. Like, what's your biggest worry about the future for the country?
I mean, that sounds right. That it goes there. I mean, I'm also struck that like on these things that really hurt the Democrats, like trans, you saw this early effort by some people, including Gavin Newsom, to kind of move away from it, and he was immediately punished for it, and he went right back into just not moving on trans. I have. The progressives who I talked to after the November 2024 elections were much more like, okay, we weren't getting the full picture, like the country's kind of gone in a direction we didn't understand. The media definitely lied to us about Biden's health. We get it. We're sort of in a moment of introspection. My sense is that the introspection did not last very long. It lasted, maybe a few months. You still sort of see some stuff out there. But mostly it's just gone back to Trump as Hitler and the ISIS fascists. And, and for Mamdani, I think it's, I just think for a lot of people, I think voters are also negotiating a lot. They're like, they'll elect somebody because they just think I'll tend to get more of what I want under this guy than the other guy. And that the extreme rhetoric signals that. So I don't think that the voters are as radical as Mamdani at all. But
even in New York, it's like he won with 1 million votes. That's only 1/8 of the population of the city. I mean, it's not like to claim like I have like the general will of the public to do what I want to you people. It's like, well, no, you won 1/8 of the
Yeah. That's a very helpful reminder. Yeah, and maybe we're making too big of a deal of it. Although you have to say the affordability stuff feels like that is where it's all headed. It's not clear what the parties can really deliver on it. I mean, the border was such an easy thing in some ways. You just close the border, or in the trans thing, you just ban that. Like you get to things like lowering housing prices, getting salaries up. What are you going to do about AI and the ways in which it's just, replacing a lot of, entry-level jobs? Those are really hard problems, and hard problems don't tend to be the ones that our parties are attracted to solving. So, yeah.
They're attracted to problems that they can paper over with money and then allow them to fester until they're out of office, or even if they're still in office, they can pretend it was somehow somebody else's problem, like Gavin Newsom and homelessness.
Oh, yeah. It all feels like late empire problems, for sure. I mean, the thing that we have going for us that I think these other civilizations that declined didn't is the First Amendment and free speech, and that there's this incredible corrective potential. It's funny because, as you know, there's sort of a conversation on the right now about like, oh, maybe democracy is not the greatest system. Maybe we could have something like monarchy. My response would be like, why would the right like not be just the most adamantly pro-free speech, pro-democracy side right now, given that Trump really won? Because I think a fair number of people, I'm not saying this was the main issue, there's certainly inflation, migration and all that, but I think a fair number of people, self-included, looked at the behavior of the left and were like, this is terrifying. Like they're trying to put their political opponents in prison. They've created a censorship industrial complex to censor their opponents. It's gone too far. Free speech allowed us to expose those things, talk about those things, criticize those things, and I think had a lot to do with the fact that you did get a Trump victory. That gives me a lot of hope. That should, I would think, for the right would affirm their confidence in democracy, because I think the left has been turning against democracy and free speech precisely because they think that they're losing, because their agenda is terrible. And so that's why they're trying to still censor in Europe or whatnot. But for the right, I would be like, you've got a really basically very popular mainstream agenda on all these different issues, including the main ones, border. I think until this foreign policy is sort of a more withdrawing foreign policy, but trans, all these different issues. So I think that, like, for me, I would be like, the one thing that gives me hope is that we still have a functioning liberal democracy that could correct in ways that I think past civilizations haven't been able to.
we're scheming together on to tell the story of the Twitter files and censorship, more broadly. So, and one of the things that you sort of recommended me and Lisa watch, my wife, is The Century of the Self. So I think we're into episode 3. So this is this telling.
How are you enjoying it? Are you enjoying it?
It's deeply upsetting and riveting. So
great.
So
good.
We'll set the table for this. And why would you recommend this thing? Because I, as we start to like come to the tail end of our conversation, free speech is. I want to make sure we got to this. I'm glad you brought it up. It is like under fresh attack from every angle, but the ideology behind it runs very deep and is not that new.
Well, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it too. I mean, I think that what's powerful about that documentary, and it's been a while since I saw it, is just that, Freud is this important figure in the early 20th century. And for all the things that he got wrong, the thing that he got right is that a lot of the decisions that we're making and a lot of the things that we do are driven by unconscious instincts, impulses, paradigms, ways of seeing the world that we're really not even aware of. And then we rationalize the decisions after we make them. And so what this documentary describes is how as it's not just Freud. I mean, there's other things going on in the early 20th century.
Lippmann.
Yeah. They start to think about in a time of mass democracy, women get the vote, right? Early 20th century. Black people are kind of getting the vote, and so everybody can see where this is headed. And meanwhile, really since the late 19th century, like 1890s, there's a lot of there was just like massive unrest. I mean, anarchists are like killing people. They kill a president. There's bombings. There's it's revolutionary
McKinley
moment.
that's executed by an anarchist.
By an anarchist, right? So you get all this unrest, and the elites, the university professors, the people in government, they kind of go, look, if we have to just use force to put down this to repress, it's going to be very bad. Just in a lot of different ways. Much better if we can manufacture consent, meaning get everybody get a majority to support different things. And so this guy, Walter Lippmann, who was a progressive, and that's important because progressives have a view of we're going to kind of manage society through expertise.
Straighten the crooked arrow of man. It's the the most perfect example of progressivism for me, as is sort of eugenics. We're going to just engineer the perfect person. It's like that's the opposite of evolution, right? Like evolution is not engineered.
Right.
It's not actually like Darwin.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah, so you sort of get this beginning of this model where the experts were literally, Lippmann said, we're going to, kind of paint a picture for people. So we're going to have people think in pictures, and we're going to create these pictures. Sort of the beginning of public relations, propaganda. We would call it information operations. Yeah. And then it really is first begins this little, elite strategy and movement to get support for people to go to World War I, because Americans are not inclined to go back to Europe fight.
And Wilson, as I remember it, ran on an anti-war platform, and he didn't get a majority because of the split because it was a multi-party situation. So he is the worst.
He is the worst. And there's a bunch of bad ones. And then then he takes us to war. Yeah. And he's convinced of the power of the propaganda for World War I. By the time you get to World War II, it is becoming more sophisticated. After World War II, Mike Benz famously describes the CIA basically take the same manufacturing consent strategy as a way to govern the empire and control governments. They're also blowing up people and killing people, but like when you can, you're trying to shape perception and shape opinions, and
counter that being done by the adversaries like the Soviet Union. Yep. It's sort of like a game everybody's in.
It's a competition. It's a strategy. It's exciting for these intellectuals to do this. They're trying to tap into deep instincts, deep motives. It's why they're always calling everybody Putin lovers, because they're always looking for some way to trigger the in-out dichotomy. Ironically or not ironically, from people that have been kind of globalist, always accusing their opponents of being, Putin stooges. That all comes into crisis in 2016. You realized as they start demanding censorship, start winning censorship in reaction to Trump, that they viewed Brexit and Trump as signs that their system was failing. And they don't know what to do about it, so they create a censorship industrial complex. And that's the censorship industrial complex is simply the elites realizing that they had lost the power that they first gained in the early 20th century to shape public opinion. And that my favorite, maybe the greatest expression of it, and the New York Times wrote about it when they did an article about René DiResta, who's one of the most important censorship industrial complex leaders. They called it peer-to-peer misinformation, which is just a really disturbing idea, because the idea itself holds the idea that the government should get involved in peer-to-peer communication. Voters, which otherwise might be known as voters talking to each other, voters talking to political candidates, the heart of the agora, the heart of democracy, this dialogue. And they're saying that's peer-to-peer misinformation. That's how panicked the elites got. But yeah, I think that sense of power that the elites had, that we are the ones that are going to decide what information people get, what pictures are in their head, is shattered with social media and the populist revolts of 2016.
So you have you have sort of this peak, you've got the Twitter files, with that ultimately you and Matt Taibbi really expose and stay on as a story. And I think, but then you also have the thing that takes us to the present, like to the very, very present, which is, as we sit here, there are multiple U.S. senators making demands of Apple and Google to do to X and to Grok what was done to Parler in the peak Jan 6th frenzy, which is total deplatforming, to have Apple and Google say, you can no longer have these apps installed on your phone as an app. And of course, what would naturally follow is to pressure third-party cloud providers, which is what happened to Parler, where it's like, not only did they get the apps taken out, Amazon Web Services, which occupies something like 30-40% of all hosting of the internet, pulled their hosting. So you can't really have a large-scale social media platform without really big, massive data centers to deal with all the traffic. So you can say you can host it on your Dell, but yeah, the second you get 2,000 users, your Dell's gonna crash. How should Americans think about the threats to free speech today? And let's start with the calls from around the attacks on Elon Musk, this current attempt to deplatform X. The predicate for it right now is that the AI tools are being used to essentially create fake nudes of both public figures and also I guess the claim is also underage. I have not seen these images, but I don't doubt that it's at least it's possible this is happening. These AIs can do crazy stuff. How do you understand that as an issue and what's happening?
I think free speech is hanging by a thread globally, and that thread is Elon Musk. Literally that's it. And you can, I praised Mark Zuckerberg when he moved away from their censorship system to a system more like Elon's, but what's happening on X right now, in the change of consciousness and the way that he's changed the algorithms, to allow for, much more diversity and, let's be honest, a lot more right-wing content than anybody had even been aware existed. I wasn't even aware that this quantity of right-wing content was possible until you start to see it. And very politically, very, controversial things around race are being talked about migration. Part of me wonders how long it'll last. I just kind of go, it's such an extremely unusual moment to have this level of free speech on a platform. We've never seen anything like it. We've really not seen anything like that level of free speech since I think before the beginning of the 20th century. Really after the revolution up until World War I, you had pretty high levels of free speech. You couldn't really control it because it was printing presses. What's happening now is absolutely extraordinary. So I think the establishment, they're desperate to either shut it down or censor it. Elon himself said the other day, very accurately, and we'd been saying something similar, is that they're just looking for justifications to censor. And we should respond to everything that they say, but we should be aware that if one thing goes down, they're going to be looking for something else. It is a central priority for the left, I would say. And it's not to say that there's some people on the right that were still some bad behavior after the Charlie Kirk thing, demanding censorship, but really it's the left parties and the parties that they're in alliance with, like this, like the Chancellor of Germany, they're out to find stuff to take it down. Now, this particular case with AI creating nudes is very interesting. And I don't know what my view is of it yet. I know that I could paint a picture of a celebrity, her face, and then paint her naked body, and that would be legal. I can't see any court disallowing that. What about children with children that don't exist? Can you do that? That's interesting, because part of the point about the child is that it harms the kids that are involved in it. Right. So I think the question is,
but it's both just disgusting, but it's exploitation of real human beings. It's not just an image.
So the question is,
as much as Foucault would like them,
right? So the question is, what will the courts, rule on these things? I think it's extremely interesting. I think Elon has made it clear that he's not allowing, he's like shut down this stuff in the meantime. So they're just using, but they're clearly looking for things. I saw there was a story in the Telegraph that said that the Canadians and the British were collaborating to try to use this as a way to shut down X. Canada said that was not the case. But we do know, because we've documented it extensively, that the UK government, the European government, the Brazilian government, the Australians and New Zealanders are all working together to try to censor the whole internet. And the minute that there's a Democrat in the White House, they're going to have, I think, their support to do everything they can to impose the censorship system. Then you would ask, well, would that even be legal if it violated the First Amendment? Well, they figured out how they wanted to do it, which was basically to have these supposedly non-governmental organizations demand censorship of the social media platforms that is sort of tacitly approved by the government, but provides a third-party excuse. So they could sort of say, oh, well, it wasn't the government demanding it was these third parties. That's what I worry about. That's what I get really nervous about, is that that's why I think we're in such a tenuous moment. I mean, the British, German, and French governments could all fall in the next, 3 to 4 years. In fact, the elections are one after the other. I think it's 2027, 2028, 2029, 2027 in France, 2028 in Germany, 2029 in Britain. So, if the elections were held today, the right-wing populist candidates would win. I think they would largely shut down the censorship industrial complexes in their countries. On the other hand, if Gavin Newsom is president in 3 years from now, and somehow they manage to keep in power in Europe, they're very close to being able to impose the censorship system worldwide.
There was so you've built, what people might not fully know just out there watching is, you have an organization called Civilization Works, and that you've assembled something really awesome, which is this Westminster Forum of global free speech advocates. I really feel like you've built the movement to fight this worldwide, sharing information, putting it out there. Talk about that. Talk about what it's been like to move. Because I remember when we talked about this before and about your entry into the Twitter files, it wasn't like you were like an ACLU lawyer back when they were good that came into this. You were sort of coming into this space somewhat fresh, because you've worked on a lot of different topics and we've talked about a lot of different topics sitting here.
Right.
So talk about what you've built and like what kind of impact you feel like is happening with Civilization Works and the Westminster Project.
Sure. I mean, so after the Twitter files, as you mentioned, we did a lot of other censorship, reporting. The Congress was able to get files. We had a lot of documents. We were able to track censorship on like all the big platforms. And it was always the same basic thing of the government directly pressuring the platforms, but then having its approved NGOs flag content to be censored. After we got clear about what that was, the first thing we did was we did a meeting in June of 2023, where in Westminster, Britain, in London, where we came out with a manifesto, or we called it a declaration, to just say, what we viewed as acceptable and unacceptable. Obviously, there is some legal censorship and justifiable censorship, and it's worth, explaining to people that we believe that those things should be censored. I think that child should be censored. Defamation in very, extreme cases, fraud. You can't lie to somebody about your product and then poison them. And then immediate incitement to violence, where the controversial thing is the immediacy of it, and that you can incite violence in the United States. It is legal to do that. You just can't do it immediately in a way that would directly physically harm somebody. we kind of crafted this, and we got all of our friends to sign it. It's actually a nice group of leftists and rightists. It's liberals and conservatives, people that are not classifiable, people you would know: Steven Pinker, Jonathan Haidt, Barry Weiss, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Slobodan Zizek, who I think is
interesting. Sort of like a
communist or something. I don't know what he is.
He's sort of like an interesting thinker, kind of radical.
Yeah,
but heterodox guy. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we were careful to balance it, make sure it really felt like left and right. And then that was, I think, very important, because I think that it basically set a kind of benchmark to be like, look, this, censorship, beyond, that we describe here, we're against. And so we didn't have to kind of reinvent the wheel. Every time you see it, when it falls into that category. So that was then, and then we've now done, I guess we've done it then 2 more times, where we just bring people that are involved in fighting online censorship to London, because, it wasn't being done. I mean, there's a group called FIRE that fights free speech, censorship on campus, but nobody had really taken on the online censorship. Mike Benz had done a bunch of really great, important research. I'm the CBR chair, and the CBR is Carol Ratner, who's supported Mike and seeded all this. She's also supporting Westminster. So it's become like, so now people are showing up from around the world. Next year we're going to go bigger. But thank you for mentioning it. I think it is for me, free speech is like the only issue. Well, I should say it's the only issue I work on that I would die for. I love nuclear power. I wouldn't die for nuclear power. I think renewables are garbage. I'm not going to die trying to. I would give up my life to protect free speech, because for me, it's such a sacred obligation. I don't want to live if I can't use my voice to express my feelings. I don't want my kids to have to live in that world. So for me, it's fundamental. And once I got clear about that, then it was like, okay, this is lifelong. Like, I'm gonna always. I've said I'm always gonna work as long as I'm functioning. I will be a free speech advocate. And then, all the cliches turned out to be true. So, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And I mean, I like moving on from issues like after we've had a bunch of success on nuclear. We don't really need more. Nuclear is at 61% approval. Renewables are at 54%. So nuclear is in great shape.
Yeah.
I don't have some need to keep working on some issue for my whole life. Free speech, I will always be on it. Hopefully not as intensively as we are now. But it turns out that free speech is something that always has to be protected, because there's just some instinct in a lot of people to want to make other people be silent. It's something very deep in people to shut people up. It's how humans have actually behaved for most of our history, is by silencing certain groups of people. It's such a rare, I get kind of misty-eyed thinking about it, because it's just this little, very rare, tiny period of time, like last 250 years, where free speech at this seriously radical level has existed in really only one place in the world. So for me, it's like I feel such gratitude towards the founders who had this vision of the First Amendment, of free speech, and then the way the courts have done a great job sort of carving out exceptions to that over time in particular cases.
Yeah, in a way that's that's Bren, as I understand it, as not a legal expert, but very narrowing. It's like, when you hear someone say, well, you can't incite violence, it's like, you need to look at just how narrow. Like, you can basically say things that sound like you're wanting to start a revolution. You can.
Yes.
You can say from the river to the sea, and yes, I mean kill all the Jews.
Yes.
You can say that. I just said it. In America, I won't be thrown. I don't believe that. But you can say it and believe it, and that's protected speech in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, people often ask me, like, what about hate speech? What about people that are calling for genocide? Just imagine if you couldn't call for genocide. Sounds funny. Don't take that out of context. Please don't clip that funny. I mean, like, if you defend the United States of America, it involved a genocide of indigenous people. So you could literally be in a situation where people are like, if you're defending the United States of America, you're defending genocide. So, I mean, that's how easy it would be to, when you take away the immediacy of the incitement to violence, or you start to say it's hate speech or something. Yeah. So, I mean, this is just first of all, it's an honor to work on free speech. I mean, it's it's just such a higher calling, to be able to look back and be like, I helped for whatever my, 25 years of my life that I worked on that. I mean, that is on my deathbed, that'll be one of the most important things. And
Yeah.
and the people that get involved are some of the best people I've ever met and worked with because they're courageous. They're usually brilliant and creative because they have something to say that's being censored. They're somewhat dangerous in the best way possible. So yeah, I mean, it's just it's the one of the most, I think it's the most exciting movement in the world right now, and it's certainly one of the most exciting that I've ever been involved with.
I think that in a very real sense, it will always be a battle, like you said, because we do have that impulse in us. And I think to like, oh no, that's not acceptable. That's too outside the norm. It's very like, we're all sort of secret censors if we're being honest with ourselves, and you have to sort of train yourself in that exercise. That notion, like Voltaire said that about, I'll defend, I might not like what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. It is about as singular a kind of like, what does it mean to be the West? I feel like if you don't have that, are you even the West? Are you even civilization at all?
Or if you're that type 2 civilization, that's tribal civilization rather than an Enlightenment civilization. I mean, that's in Kant's famous essay, "What is the Enlightenment?" That's the thing he keeps coming back to. It's that you would both obey the laws you have and speak vociferously against those laws, and there'd be no consequences for you speaking vociferously against those laws. I was going to say one other thing, because there's been some controversy on the right about things that people have said that people believe are anti-Semitic. It sort of has to do with Israel. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been some pressure put on people to exclude people, to not say certain things. And the one thing I wanted to say, because I think a lot of the people that want to silence others or shun others for saying things that they view as anti-Semitic, I think that it took this episode for me to get clear about it, that my concern about often those efforts to kind of silence or exclude people for saying things that are, that you might disagree with or that might be completely wrong, is that I think that those of us that kind of start to feel the pressure that we shouldn't associate with certain people or talk with certain people or allow a certain kind of conversation, is I don't think the people that are calling for that realize how insulted people feel when they're told who they can and can't talk with. And I didn't realize it until this last kind of round of it, but it's like, it is insulting because it's like people are telling you shouldn't be able to talk to this person because you're so gullible or stupid or whatever that you're just going to believe whatever they tell you. Like, this person is so dangerous, and the masses or you as individuals are so gullible that you couldn't possibly talk to somebody who holds these awful ideas and not embrace those awful ideas. I think that the real cultural learning for people is to realize how counterproductive it is for them to be demanding the censoring or the silencing or the cancellation of people for holding views they don't like. Of course, they're free to do it, but I don't think it's something that makes people very many friends, because I think people take it like I sort of took it, which was like, sounds like you don't really trust me to be able to make up my own mind about things.
You're hitting on, the obvious instance here is you've got Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, Ben Shapiro, Megyn Kelly, this spectrum of folks,
right?
And then the Israeli issue, the Jewish issue writ large, Jewish issue being like, people like Nick Fuentes believe that the Jews are the great demonic force that's like making young men's lives in America miserable because they control the institutions and they've rigged it all to be radical left and
right,
all kinds of reasons. I'm certainly like way more. I've gotten more right wing as I've aged. I'm like almost regressing back to the mean because I was like a little young Republican growing up. So I'm the opposite of you in that respect. I'm certainly way more like generally Jewish friendly and even just pro-Israeli, I would say, kind of, sort of. I don't really care about Israel I care about America. But like, I understand what the Israelis are dealing with. I'm sympathetic.
Yeah.
This is really hard. This issue you're bringing up is really hard. It's hard because freedom of association and culture. Because I think really underneath the concerns that are legitimate from someone like Ben Shapiro is, well, look at what's happened to the left. They've had this no enemies to the left. In fact, just do it. Be a radical, be all these crazy lunatics and be communists and be like, be pedophiles, like literally, like the queer movement is, the queer theory is basically like whack-a-mole with pedophiles. And at the core of its philosophy, Foucault, they're all like trying to argue.
Yeah.
So you've got this problem of culture is partly a function of curation. Curation means saying, no, you're not in my bookstore. No, you're not part of my company. I want a certain culture.
Right.
You don't fit it. I don't want you here. And I think when it starts to get to something as broad as, like, let's say the conservative movement, well, there's no hiring manager for the conservative movement. So it's much more amorphous. And I don't think there's like an easy answer. I see both sides on this one.
I guess the question is, what are we talking about here? I mean, because it's sort of like, I mean, and to be fair, I didn't listen to Ben's whole speech, but it's kind of like, are you just saying that Heritage should not invite Tucker Carlson to speak? Or are you saying that anybody that's your friend should not talk to Tucker Carlson? Because that's where I'm kind of like, don't tell me who I can talk to.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think just to pause and pull back a little bit, like the worst moral crime in human history was perpetrated against Jews not very long ago. And folks that grew up after that grew up with this, awful awareness of it. And I think the sensitivity is very understandable. I think that there's a misdiagnosis here in terms of what gives rise to these things. And then there's a second, I think, misdiagnosis about how to deal with it. Ultimately, my view is that you deal with those things through more speech, through more argument, and that you don't deal with them by trying to silence or shun or whatever. I mean, really, it backfires. People don't, this is the part they don't get. It really, really backfires. And they call it Streisand effect. Call it just don't tell me who to talk to. I think it's ultimately, counterproductive. But I think that it's like, I guess the point I wanted to make about it was, I think the thing I didn't quite realize was, because I was sort of like, why do I feel sort of offended by it?
Yeah.
And I think it's the sense of being infantilized, or a feeling of being sort of like, you're not capable of having a conversation with somebody that's saying these vile things and not believing those vile things.
It's going to infect your mind. It's going to brainwash you.
Yeah, and when you say it like that, I'm sure that the people that are calling for it would say, no, I'm not saying that. But then it's like, well, what are you saying exactly? Because I think that is what people are hearing, Now, I will say, we also saw some very positive response. I mean, Piers Morgan, I think he didn't argue well with Nick Fuentes, but at least he argued with them, and he had that, that's the kind of, and people loved it. I mean, so these kinds of arguments and debates are great. I mean, it's funny. I will say one other data point. They did, and this is a focus group, so it's not strong scientific data, but I think it's Manhattan Institute did some focus group research on young Gen Z men, famously right-wing Gen Z men, including like ones that listen to Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, whatever. And they found that the ones that heavily listened to Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes were not more anti-Semitic or even anti-Israel, I believe, than people that didn't. So this,
really?
So this idea that sort of like, if you listen to them, that one of the things that one of the great books on misinformation that came out, I think it was a Princeton psychology professor. He just said this whole idea that people are incredibly gullible and that like there will be some misinformation, they're all going to fall for it. It's contrary to what we find, which is that people hold on to wrong. People are much more likely to hold on to wrong beliefs after they've been debunked than they are to change their mind and believe wrong things. We tend to be much more cognitively stubborn than we are gullible. So I put that out there to sort of say, I'm ambivalent. I don't even want to identify myself as part of a movement at this point. I like being a journalist, but it was something that came up for me the first time because it was like, it was like, why is it bothering me for people to kind of, ask or whatever that I don't have these conversations?
It bothers me a lot, and I've done a couple videos about it. And I also found myself I'm in like a WhatsApp group with a bunch of mostly like people in the think tank world, but they were all going crazy with about like Kevin Roberts, who'd been on the show, who runs the Heritage Foundation, kind of stepped in it, coming out about defending Tucker Carlson. And it's been this whole big rolling problem.
Yeah.
And I was like kind of the lone voice in this WhatsApp group, like, yeah, isn't this kind of, what is this, cancel culture? What's the problem? I don't know about this. I don't know. This is making me feel icky. It's like the vibe here is making me feel icky. Some of this is,
I had somebody in a WhatsApp group sort of explain why it was so bad. And I remember feeling like my intelligence was being insulted by that person. And I'm confident that that person did not intend to insult my intelligence. But it was sort of I'm not sure like what you think like people are aware of, but I think people are able to kind of, make judgments here. I think it reveals deep sensitivity on the issue, and I want to acknowledge and respect that. But it is a little bit like, we've all grown up in the shadow of the Holocaust. I mean, we've all grown up in that, and it's not just a group of people. And certainly, I think if I were Jewish, I would almost certainly feel much more, strongly about it and have a much stronger, reaction to it. But I just think it's like we're all. I mean, it reminded me when I think it was like. It was the Anti-Defamation League was on a Spaces with Elon, and they were like, "Well, we really need you to come to Auschwitz." It was around like when he was first being accused.
Yeah,
like, you really need you to come to Auschwitz and whatever. And he was just like, he was being very nice actually, and he was just like, I'm familiar with the Holocaust, like, like that's there for all of us, and it's not like if we just learned more about the Holocaust that would change my mind about free speech.
It seems like this. It's like these multi-pronged attacks, and it's not clear which one is the deeper. I think the notion of maybe they're just two sides of the same coin. This notion about hate speech in the name of like almost like public health, like protecting people from the harms of misinformation or hate, or is this one element, and then there's the active desire to propagandize and control the public. This is the Wilson, Lippmann, Bernays of the documentary and everything. Yes. I think you could say the election of 2024, even if Trump is ultimately like not great, even if you don't like Trump, one thing that's got to be clear is as a natural experiment in the manufacturing of consent, you had 4 years of basically total institutional control of the narrative, deplatforming, shunning, firing. Like you couldn't even say like what a woman is on any of the major platforms without being censored or shut down. You couldn't say that getting a virus and surviving it gave you immunity, which is also the way vaccines effing work. How do you think they work?
Right.
You couldn't say that. You get a little blue box. You still might on YouTube get a little blue box if you say like natural immunities. So we experienced the closest thing to like still be to not being like that was totalitarianism.
Yes.
And yet, in the midst of all that, Donald Trump still got reelected. He actually like gained in every category. So the hypothesis that you can manufacture consent, and if you just have total control, you'll have total control, that's just false.
Yes. And that should give us all a lot of hope. A lot of hope. I mean, Barbra Streisand effect, which refers to this idea that, you try to censor something and it gets more attention. I mean, that's a beautiful part of our human nature. I mean, it's the kind of gossipy part, right? It's like, oh, what is it? The thing that's upsetting everybody. You want to pay attention to it. You need to.
I need to scratch that itch. I've got that scab from that chicken pox. I'm going to scratch it.
Right. Yeah. It's so, I mean, I think your other point though is really right on, is that like, it's been the left if we're just honest about it, the left has been the ones demanding the censorship industrial complex in really totalitarian, secretive, conspiratorial ways. The The right, it's been very, I think the two big instances where Trump is after Charlie Kirk, and then I think this latest dust up with Tucker and the anti-Semitism allegations. In both cases, I think is more emotional. It was like less like, I don't think there wasn't some effort to impose some big censorship system. ADL has been a bad actor in a lot of ways, and working with the censorship industrial complex. But there's a way in which, like Trump saying, "Oh yeah, maybe we should take away their license," or
right.
It's
we can do this the easy way or the hard way, as far as like the FCC.
Yeah, Brandon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
that's not good.
It's not bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's not good. But it's also like the size of the threat. It's just different.
Yeah, it's not the same thing as, I don't know, orchestrating every advertiser of the Fortune 2000 together to have a whitelist of the things that you will advertise on, and then I don't know, in the case of like Obama and Hillary and the gang actively being like, how are we going to defund and destroy Twitter now that it's not now that Elon, like the second he bought it, it's very they're like, how do we defund it?
Yeah.
Let's get Disney and Apple and everybody to pull the ads. That's applied whatever's going on, the long story of with Tucker and anti-Semit, Jew hatred, whatever you want to call that stuff. Even for the most part, the critics pushing back hard on Tucker, I don't believe are trying to get all of his advertisers to pull.
I haven't seen that. Or try to get him deplatformed.
No.
I mean, it's always a funny thing is when people are because people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't give a platform to Tucker. And it's like, well, but Tucker has 14 million Twitter followers. So who are you trying to prevent? That's why I think it's really not rational. Yeah. I just think it's coming from a place of a lot of upset. I mean, I think the same with Charlie Kirk. I mean, here in Texas, they're still trying to get teachers fired for celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. I'm like, we want to know who those teachers are. We should publicize who those teachers are. Don't fire them. They're totally in their speaking of, incitement to violence, that's legally permissible. Allow it and talk back to it, and let's try to figure out some program to kind of deprogram people from their hatred.
Got any ideas for your next book?
Oh, sleeping in, how to sleep longer. No, this one was a big one, dude. So hopefully I'll take a little break.
Well, as we wrap up, what are the things at this year? We're in 2026, midterms, 250th anniversary. This is your third time on the show. How are you thinking about the year ahead? Are you optimistic? Are you vigilant? Are you a mix of both?
I mean, predicting what's going to happen is impossible, right? Nobody saw Venezuela coming. I mean, the president doesn't know what he's going to do. So how would anybody else know what he's going to do? I mean, what I was going to say is, because we've talked in the past about sort of, the intersection of kind of mentality and, family and students. And I'm here in Austin. I'm working at the University of Austin. I've got students I love teaching, it turns out. And I would just say, the things that you've been hearing, if you're like a parent, are super important. I don't think that you have to go to the extremes even of banning social media for your kids, but the kids need to read a lot more. There needs to be a lot more reading by kids. I think the research on that, and this is not just my experience now, there's a lot of research on it. They need to be reading more, get them taking notes in class, careful notes in class, get them the social skills they need. Financial Times is a story about how people with good social skills and poor math skills make more money than people with great math skills and poor social skills. Mm-hmm. And that includes in the tech sector, where we don't know.
Because you become the CEO or the manager.
Yeah. Yeah, or your creative director. I mean, you have high value positions. That social is something that we need to revalue. There's also a whole bunch of jobs that AI is replacing. So people should know that you're really looking to help your children build skills in things that AI will never be able to do. I mean, I'm taking the students and doing field work, interviewing people. But I just want to make that plug to all those young parents out there. Definitely you want to restrict. I mean, the more you can get your kids reading, there's a new study that just showed that even parents who just read to their kids help to counteract the negative effects of too much social media. But my hope is that I think kids, the Gen Z kids, were disadvantaged by the extent to which we, their parents, allowed them to use social media. And I think that hopefully the millennials, as they're raising their kids, the Gen A kids, will be able to compensate in the other direction.
I think that's a great, very dad and saving America way to end this show. Michael Shellenberger, thanks for coming back.
Great to be with you, John.
And here's to the next one.
Amen. Great to see you.